City Council meeting for Monday, May 6th, 2024. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Etten?
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder?
Here.
Councilmember Groff?
Here.
Councilmember Strawn?
Here.
Mayor Rowe?
Here. And with us at the dais, we have our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, who is on my left at the end of the dais. And then on the right, at the other end of the dais, we've got Siobhan Toller here this evening, who's our City Attorney, sitting in for Rachel Tierney. And we will be sure to test her as much as possible this evening with all of our legal questions. We'll have other folks participating in the meeting, including the staff and guests, and we'll make introductions as various agenda items come up. I do want to let folks know that there are meeting materials in the back of the chamber for anyone who needs to reference extra copies of the agenda. We've got that available, as well as a full set of meeting materials in the binder on the back table that's available to the public as well. Would remind folks, if you've got a cell phone, to silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting. And we'll go over some more rules of the road for public comment and things like that as those opportunities arise. With that, we'll ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I forgot to mention, I know we've updated our capabilities in the chambers here for folks who have hearing difficulties. We've got some new technology that's available. If you are in that need, we can set you up with that. You can maybe check with the city manager and we can get that straightened out. So I'll try to remember that in future opening announcements. With that, we'll proceed with our agenda this evening. The first item is to consider tonight's agenda. And as always, we'll check with staff first to see if there are any changes that staff needs to make to the agenda this evening.
Mr. Mayor, there's no changes to the agenda.
All right. Are there any changes council members would like to make or any items council members would like removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration?
No.
Councilmember Strawn?
I'd like to remove 10C just for clarification on ownership, given there are many different establishments at the same suite in the same building.
Okay. Any other requested changes to the agenda from council members this evening? All right, and then we'll just do a quick check with folks here from the public this evening. We just were talking about section 10 of our agenda, which is what we call our consent agenda. It starts on the bottom of the first page and continues on to the second page. It's about 7 items. Normally those items are all taken up as a single motion with a limited opportunity for comment or discussion, and they're also at the very end of the meeting. So we want to, as a courtesy to anybody who might be here from the public for one of those items, check now to see if you are, and we can move that item earlier in the meeting. Is there anyone here for an item that wishes to either speak or ask a question about an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? Does not appear to be the case. So with that, we've got our proposed agenda with the one item 10C removed from consent for separate consideration by Councilmember Strawn. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So, second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to approve the agenda as amended. Thusly, discussion on that motion. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda this evening. Next on the agenda is our first opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak on general matters related either to city business or of concern or interest to people in the community. We will have opportunities for public comment on agenda items as we go forward, but this is specific to items that are not on this evening's agenda. So once again, this would be a chance for members of the public to speak on items, as I said, either of interest to people in the community or related to city business, but not under consideration this evening. I see we've got a speaker who's been with us before, so I won't go through the whole rules of the road, but I'll turn it over to our speaker. Welcome.
Roger S. Wagner Place. In the past, this room would be filled with residents contributing to the meetings. It'd be nice if you started doing a little outreach and inviting people to come to the meetings and say you're doing a great job or say they want to change something or whatever, or at least get involved in some of the other things you do after the public comment part. So it'd be nice if you, one of your newsletters, tell people they're invited to come in and do things and get involved. And I hope you're going to update your fence ordinance so we don't get any more large fences on the street side of the lake shore property. Sounds like you guys might have taken care of it, but it would be nice if you made that very clear in the ordinance that you can't do that. And then finally, last year wouldn't let me ask the auditors a question, so I'm gonna ask now. I'm just curious if they audit the fee schedule to make sure none of the fees are too high or too low. And that's everything. Thanks a lot.
All right, and we'll make sure to get that question asked, or perhaps even answered in the presentation, now that it's been asked at this point. Thank you, Mr. Hess. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak under general public comment at the start of the meeting here?
Thank you for the opportunity. I think you all do a great job, and I appreciate all your work.
All right, and you have to say your name and street for the record.
Cynthia White, Roseville resident.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
With that, if there's no one else to speak under general public comment, we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda this evening. And that brings us then to our business items, or excuse me, our recognitions and donations. I almost skipped the reason that we've got all these police officers looking good in the back of the room there. We have one proclamation this evening, and that is related to Peace Officers Memorial Day as well as National Police Week. I'll read the proclamation and then a motion from the council would be in order. The proclamation reads, whereas the Congress and the President of the United States have designated the week in which May 15th occurs as National Police Week and May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day, and whereas the Roseville Police Department plays an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of all members of the community, and whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the duties, responsibilities, hazards, and sacrifices of their law enforcement agency, and that members of our law enforcement agency recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence and disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression. And whereas the men and women of the Roseville Police Department are unceasingly provide this vital public service, now therefore be resolved, the City of Roseville hereby declare the week of May 12th to May 18th to be National Police Week in the City of Roseville, and May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day, and be it further resolved that the City of Roseville calls on all citizens to join in commemorating law enforcement officers past and present who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered and dedicated service to their communities and have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens, and be it further resolved to observe May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day in honor of law enforcement officers who, through their courageous deeds, have made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their community, to include Officer Howard Johnson and Officer Bruce Russell, or who have become disabled in the performance of their duty, and let us recognize also and pay respect to the survivors of our fallen heroes.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Atten, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Any discussion on that motion?
Thank you all.
With that, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is approved. And thank you again to all of our public safety officers. That then brings us
Should
to,
we get a photo of these fine people who came to see it?
I don't know that they want a photo, actually.
But maybe a reason.
They sit in the back of the room. Anyway, with that, we'll move on with our business items this evening. The first item is to hold a public hearing to consider certifying unpaid utility charges to the property tax roll.
Would we,
Oh.
item removed
Item.
from consent agenda?
Oh, I apologize. I forgot. We haven't had one for so long. I forgot all about that. That's right. So item 10C has been removed for separate consideration from the consent agenda, and I'll turn it over to City Manager Trudgeon to introduce that item.
Yes. One second here. So item 10C approves 2 massage therapist establishment licenses, one for Clarity Massage and Wellness at 2353 Rice Street, number 130, and another license for Zen Healing at 1789 Lexington Avenue.
All right, and Councilmember Strawn, you would ask this item to be removed for separate consideration.
Yes, thank you. I just noted that there was multiple establishments at the exact same address, at the exact same suite, and I want a clarification. Apparently, it is independent contractors utilizing the same space. Don't know that's something that we've addressed before. I don't know that it warrants addressing, but I wanted clarification, which we resolved while we were chatting about it. So,
Okay.
just so for the information, there are 3 different licensees in that exact same suite, which is 130. So just wanted to
Okay.
clarify ownership, and this came about because of the mention of a spouse or partner with the exact same address with a different name of a establishment. So just wanting to understand as we expand our massage therapy licenses, that we understand how folks are put together. And hopefully, we don't see any issues with that establishment moving forward. Thank you.
So it's similar to places where sort of independent
Hairstyle.
hairstylists or whatever operate out of the same location. Is that our understanding?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's my understanding. So those three different establishments are actually sole proprietorships, so it's just one person there, but they have a business, so they're getting the establishment license. While some of our, as you know, some of our massage therapists are businesses that have multiple therapists. These are just sole proprietors, and I imagine they work on appointment and maybe not work every day, but work out of the same space.
Okay. And just for clarity too, when we have those cases, do those individuals need both an establishment license
they do.
and a
Yep,
therapist
yep.
license? Okay.
So what we're granting tonight for, and specifically to Clarity Massage and Wellness, is a sole proprietorship. This is the establishment license.
Got it.
Offhand, I don't know about the massage therapist license. This person may already have it, I just don't know.
And those are handled administratively, so they
Handled
don't come to the
administratively,
city
yeah.
council. All right. All right, thank you. Any other questions from the council? Otherwise, a motion to approve the licenses would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Groff. A discussion on the motion?
Nothing further.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those licenses are approved, and thank you, Councilmember Strawn, for reminding me of this item, because I was cruising right into the agenda. All right, with that then, we go to our business items, and our first business item this evening is to hold a public hearing to consider certifying unpaid utility charges to the property tax roll. And I believe, is this Mr. Trudgeon? You'll
Yeah,
be
I can just
introducing
take
this
this.
item? All right.
So as you know, on a quarterly basis, we do certify delinquent utility bills and other charges by the city to the property tax roll. Recently, we understood that we should actually be holding a public hearing in the process here, so this is officially a public hearing. Notification went out to all those folks that are on the list that of their charges, and this is a public hearing if they wish to come forward and contest it. So all we need to do is hold a public hearing, and then after that, certify the delinquent accounts to the property tax rolls.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon, and I'm presuming that we do have the records of the mailing that went out with the notifications per the requirements, and if people are interested to see that, the records are available at the city manager's office, or the city administration office. All
Yep.
right. All right, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak this evening about the certification of various utility past due charges to the tax bills or assessments of the properties involved? Anyone here to speak in that public hearing? Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing, and we'll move to council consideration. We've got, I believe, a resolution that we're being asked to adopt to certify those accounts to the county for collection with property taxes.
So moved.
Second.
All right. The resolution has been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Discussion on the motion as the maker, Councilmember Strawn.
No, thank you.
All right. As the seconder, Councilmember Groff.
No, we discussed this earlier, and this is the second time around, so this is just a formality, in my opinion, so. yes,
Okay.
go for it.
All right. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, we've got the motion before us to adopt the resolution certifying the latest list of past due utility accounts to the Ramsey County Assessor for payment, for assessment on their taxes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that resolution is adopted, and those accounts will be certified unless they're paid ahead of time. With that, then, that brings us to our second business item. This is to receive our annual comprehensive financial report, our auditor communication letter, and reports on compliance for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2023. And we have Josh Kent, our Assistant Finance Director, with us this evening to introduce the audit and the auditors. we jump into presentation mode there? Perfect. Welcome.
Mayor, members of the council, great to be with you once again. I can't believe it's already been a year since we've been here doing this. But it's always, I guess, a great time, not only for me to learn, but also for the rest of the city to learn about their internal controls and stuff like that, and how we're doing as a city financially as well. And with that, we have Rebecca Peterson from RedPath with us. RedPath did our financial audit again this year, and they went over the internal controls in our financial statements as well to make sure that we were reporting within the guidelines that we need to be as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for having me here tonight. My plan for this evening is to run through a summary of the reports we issue in conjunction with the audit, and then just some high-level overview information of financial results for the year. But as you've heard me say before, we work closely with finance, but we really do work for the council. So as I'm speaking, if there's questions, you want me to stop and explain something further, please feel free to interrupt me as I go. There are 5 reports that we issue in conjunction with the audit. The first report is really the primary purpose of our audit. It's an opinion on the financial statements as to their fair and reasonable presentation. It would be cost and time prohibitive for us to look at every single transaction that the city enters into and every single item in the financial statements, but we conduct some sampling and some analytics and do various procedures in accordance with generally accepted audit standards in order to enable us to provide an opinion on the fair presentation of the financial statements. And our work and our opinion is limited to the financial statement document. So other external schedules or matters not included within the financial statements are not subject to our audit procedures. And we provide varying levels of assurance on the items actually within the financial statements. If you look in the back, you would see some items that are indicated that they're unaudited. But our long written report, the auditor's report or the opinion on the financial statements, will detail for you what level of assurance we provide on the various components of the statements. The result this year is that the city received an unmodified or a clean opinion on your financial statements, and that's the highest level of assurance we're able to provide. So in short, it's the result you want. The city prepares their own financial statements. I would say of all of the entities that I work with, the vast majority engage us or another entity to prepare their financial statements for them in conjunction with the audit, but the city prepares their own. And so that's a nod to the competency of the staff that you have here. On an annual basis, they submit those financial statements to the Government Finance Officers Association for a certificate of achievement. Last year's financial statement was awarded the award. I have a little snip of it up here. And we anticipate that the 2023 financial statements will receive the award as well. The second report that we issue in conjunction with the audit is a report on internal controls. We do not audit the city's internal controls as part of the audit, but we gain an understanding of the processes and the procedures that are in place. And if anything came to our attention that we didn't think you were already aware of, we would report it to you if we felt it was significant enough. There's also other matters that we're required by auditing standards to communicate to you within our internal control report. And one of those is if there's any material audit adjustments in conjunction with the audit. So if during the course of the audit, we identify some numbers that are recorded in the incorrect year or maybe for the incorrect amount and we adjust that for the financial statements, that's an audit adjustment and it's required that we report it to you as a finding. So there's just one internal control finding this year and that relates to audit adjustments. There was really only one significant audit adjustment this year and it related to grant reporting. I think there was some activity that related to a prior year that finance wasn't aware of. And so that's a good reminder that, even though finance has to deal with us during the audit process, it's really the city's audit and not just finance's audit. And I think finance is working with the other departments impacted to make sure that they communicate that information going forward. But as far as internal control findings go, just one audit adjustment this year is relatively good results.
And just to clarify that, so that was something that was incorrectly put in the wrong year, basically, and so
Yep.
it needed to be accounted for differently.
Exactly.
Okay.
The financial statements that are issued and that you would have had in your packet include that correction already.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mayor, to build upon that, right? So it was really a net zero transaction. So it's grant funds that come in that we send right out the door right away. So on the bottom line, it was a net zero. So expenses a little bit overstated, but revenues are a little bit overstated as well, or net zero.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
The next report that we issue in conjunction with the audit is a report on Minnesota legal compliance. The Office of the State Auditor has a series of checklists that they require public accountants to review in conjunction with our financial statement audits. And we're not attorneys, so we look at these checklists from an accounting perspective. But if we became aware of any instances of significant non-compliance in relation to those checklists, we would be communicating that to you and the state auditor as well. This year, there's no items of non-compliance reported. I think we identified a couple small things that really didn't warrant reporting that the city is working on correcting, but nothing that rises to level of requiring inclusion in the report. So again, the result you want. The next report that we issued in conjunction with the audit this year is a report on federal program compliance. This is one that's not required every year. Anytime the city expends more than $750,000 of federal funds, you're required to have a federal compliance audit, also known as a single audit. The federal government has some guidelines that we need to go through to determine what and how we test the expenditures that the city incurred. This year, you had approximately 1.9 million of federal expenditures. We tested the required elements in conjunction with the single audit, and no instances of non-compliance were identified, and no instances of questioned costs. One of the items that the federal government wants us to look at is to make sure that you're spending the money in the way you're supposed to, based on the grant terms, and if we found anything questionable, we would be reporting it. But no items identified this year, which again is the results you want. The final report that we issue in conjunction with the audit is a letter from us as the auditors to you as governance. It's a technical, very templated language letter, and so I've summarized some of the key points here for your reference. The first item I have bulleted here is accounting standards changed. Over the past few years, there's been a number of accounting standards changes. There was a new one that needed to be implemented this year. It's called GASB 96 SPIDAs, which stands for Subscription-Based IT Arrangements. And really what that's looking at is recognition that the city sometimes enters into long-term agreements for subscription-based IT. You might be subscribing to software in the cloud or whatnot, and recognizing that there's a future liability associated with that. What the statement says is you need to look at the materiality of those future commitments, if they're long-term commitments, and consider if it's material enough to be recorded in your financial statements. There was not anything significant that needed to be recorded this year, but unfortunately, in order to determine that there is nothing significant, city staff has to go through the exercise of reviewing all the contracts. So it was a pretty time-intensive standard to implement, which is why I have it listed here, even though there really was no financial statement impact. The other key component that we want to remind you of is that there are accounting estimates within the financial statements. There is a net pension liability reported in your financial statements for almost $18.5 million, and that relates to city employee participation in the para-pension plan. This fluctuates significantly year over year. The liability was much greater last year. It's dropped a little bit to be a smaller liability this year. But in reality, the city is paying on this liability through your payroll contributions on a payroll basis. It's not $18 million that you're going to have to pay over to para next week or anything like that. The other significant estimate that we have listed here is the OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits. It's really an actuarially determined number for the cost of providing employee benefits to retirees. Maybe they're staying on the city's health insurance, or other such benefits that's accrued and calculated by the actuary. There's other estimates within the financial statements, but those are the two largest. During the audit, we did not encounter any disagreements with management from our perspective, no significant difficulties encountered in performing the audit, and no significant other matters that we think you should be aware of. So by and large, those are the required communication points, and nothing too significant this year. And in the world of audit, no news is usually good news. So next up, I just have some high-level financial summary information. Here I have the city's governmental funds, and what governmental funds are those funds that are supported by property tax dollars or grant revenue that are not intended to be self-supporting. So you can see the city's general fund had an increase in fund balance this year of about 2.4 million. That is primarily the public safety aid that the city received right at December. The city received a significant amount of public safety aid from the state that you were able to recognize as revenue in 2023, but you haven't spent any of it yet. So that's what that big increase is there. So just know that that large fund balance number, it's restricted for certain things. It's not all extra money this year. Your special revenue funds, those are your funds that have a specific purpose. For example, the recreation fund, the license center fund, that have specific revenues going into their operations. And then debt service is the service of your debt, and capital project funds, that is the capital projects that the city enters into during the year. And it is quite normal for expenditures and revenues to mismatch in those funds. So some years you might see big increases and some years you might see big decreases. Next up, I have a general fund budget performance. If you look maybe 3 rows down, revenues over expenditures, comparing budget to actual, you can really see that the public safety aid was the primary component of being off from budget. General fund balance. This, as you know, the city needs to retain reserves in order to meet cash flow and future spending. And the city has a fund balance policy targeting keeping 35 to 50% of annual expenditures for cash flow purposes. This year, your working capital amount came in at about 8.8 million, which is right within your policy. The presentation that we have here includes both your general fund and your cash reserve fund, so the numbers might look a little different than you're presented internally, but for financial statement purposes, this is a presentation that's required. Next up, I have governmental funds revenue. So these are your governmental funds, your revenue year over year. You can see it's pretty consistent with prior years. Last year, there was a flip in intergovernmental revenue, which is your green bar due to some of the federal funding, but pretty consistent with historical averages. Then we have our water utility. The bar is your operating expenses, and the line is your operating revenue. I know the city's worked hard to line up utility charges to cover expenses. And that gap that you see between the operating revenue and the operating expenses is really important to help you cover future capital needs. So historically, you've been pretty close to that operating expenses bar, and it's nice to see that jump there to help cover those future capital requirements. Water fund cash flows. The water fund has had a deficit for a while, even if you look back to 2020, and it looks like there's a positive cash balance at the end of the year, which is that bottom line number. There was really some bond proceeds in there creating that positive amount. Looking from 22 to 23, the cash balance has improved significantly, which relates to that increase in operating revenues. So good news in that regard. Next up, we have the sewer fund. The bar on here, again, is operating expenses, and your line is your operating revenue. And there's that healthy gap between expenses and revenue to support your future capital. Then we have the golf course. Recreation facilities traditionally are hard to support themselves. It is not unusual if you see here the operating expenses exceed your operating revenue. That's pretty normal for recreation facilities. Next up, storm drainage. We have operating revenue well above operating expenses. And finally, solid waste recycling. We've got 2 lines here. The green line for operating revenue is your really charges for services, and that purple line, operating revenue plus grants, accounts for a county grant that the city gets on an annual basis, which really contributes to operations. You can see there's a healthy gap between those operating expenses and operating revenue. And my understanding is the city's saving for carts, is that correct? So that gap's needed to help fund those future purchases. That is all I have today as far as audit results and summary financial information, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Great. Questions for the auditor or the financial staff? Councilmember Schroeder.
Thank you for that. And I know there's a lot more detail behind all of this. You know, I do want to make sure we touch on what our resident had asked about the fee schedule, because you are showing the funds and the difference between the expense and the revenue, say with the, storm and the water and the sewer. Do you make any recommendations or look at if that gap is too big or too small?
You know, if we noticed that actual results were not in line with policy, or not in line with expectations, it's something that we would talk to city staff about, but making recommendations on the actual fees themselves is not within the scope of the audit.
Thank you for that. And
Oh, you have a follow-up or is another question?
different question.
Different, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Actually, I have a lot of detailed questions, which I think maybe what I'll do is submit them to finance. And then, but if there are some questions that need to be answered by the auditor, I assume anyone on this council could contact you directly?
Oh, absolutely, please do. Like I said, we do work for council, and two-way communication with you is an important part of the audit process. So please feel free, after the meeting tonight or at any point to reach out to us directly.
Good, because I have a lot of technical questions, and I'm going to spare everyone that for tonight.
Thank you. Other questions for the auditor or staff? I did just want to follow up on the fee schedule specifically, and this is definitely a question for the staff, not for the auditor, but so hopefully I'm not putting you too much on the spot. Can you talk a little bit about the process that the city goes through when we're looking at our various fees and the involvement maybe that the finance department has in any of the analysis that's done internally to try to figure out what is appropriate for those fees?
For that, I might.
And that's not user fees for utilities, but definitely fees for other
That's
purposes.
part of the budget.
I might be able to answer that because for the most part, we organize that through administration as far as fees. So each year, all departments look at their fees to make sure that the fees being charged cover our costs. And you'll see some incremental costs in some fees by very few dollars just to, capture that. If we have fees that we don't need to have anymore or we find are too expensive, we'll drop them. And oftentimes there's new things that we create because of some regulations that we need to create fees on. So it is an annual review that all department heads go through and look at it and then bring it forward through the administration, bring it forward for your council conversation and approval.
Right. Ms. Petrick, anything else to add?
With regard to the utility funds, those are analyzed separate of the fee schedule. They are not contained in the direct annual fee schedule. We have a outside firm come in and assist us with establishing our rates and charges. We've had the updates done every 2 years. We're in the process of examining what the rates should be. We look at operating costs, we look at capital costs, we look at the current CIP, we utilize inflation factors. And we will be presenting recommendations this fall with regards to the water, sewer, and stormwater funds. And we also do factor in the reserve policies that we currently have, specifically for operations, but then industry standards with regard to capital reserves. The proprietary funds are one fund, so they have to cover both.
Got it. Thank you, and I appreciate that, and definitely, it's good to know that there is a process for utility fees, which we've talked a number of times about, and then there's also a process for other types of fees, which is like your building permit fees and license fees, and obviously some of that comes from the state, but then other internal, like our hotel license fees and things like that. Okay. Thank you again for that. Hopefully that's helpful for the public. And with that, if there aren't other questions for staff or the auditor, we are being asked to do a motion to accept the 2023 audit and financial reports.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Discussion on that motion. Councilmember Groff is the maker of the motion.
No, just thank you for the report, and I thought it was very thorough, and I liked the notes. It explained it in a simple way without having to read through that large book in total detail, which Councilmember Schroeder did, but she'll have questions for you later.
And as the secretary, Councilmember Schroeder, discussion.
Actually, believe it
Or
or
rebuttal?
not, I enjoy going through that detail.
I know you do.
So no,
There are a few.
you know, the main thing is to have that clean opinion, and
Yes.
that's the key thing with an audit.
Any other discussion on the motion? All right, and I realize I didn't provide for an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak to the audit? Yes, welcome. Can you have to come up to the, sorry about that, but we've got the audio system here.
Yeah,
Which isn't working real well, I have to say.
okay.
Is it too loud for the people in the
No,
audience?
it's
Not
not
loud
loud
enough?
enough.
Not loud
Okay,
enough.
so you're not hearing what we're
my-
saying or what they're
I
saying?
had to pay a whole lot of attention, especially to the gentleman here.
Mm-hmm.
Get a soft voice.
All I would like to, Cynthia White, Roseville resident, I'd like to know if Councilmember Schroeder's questions to the auditor will be public.
I think as communications of the city, they're certainly requestable by members of the public as data requests. I think it's up to the asker and answer of the questions if they want to proactively make them public. So I will leave that to those individuals to decide.
I'd like to see what you ask the auditor.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, just some background. Cynthia's been when I was on the Finance Commission, she was pretty much at every meeting, so she's kind of the same level
yeah.
I'm at when it comes to this nerdy financial stuff. So I'd be happy to share my questions.
I am a nerd. But it really comes from as a resident, when I submit questions to you guys, they're public. And so it seems fair to me that questions, that involve city business, particularly with contractors, is also public.
Right.
That's mostly where they
Sure. And just to be clear, when you submit questions, they're only public if somebody makes them public. They're
Fair enough.
Yeah, so we're not necessarily just releasing all your questions out as a news release to the press every time or anything like that. But certainly the process is that is publicly available data,
Thank you.
and this would be as well.
Why don't you send me your email?
You don't have it?
Well, I want to make sure it's the same one.
Yeah, we can do
Yes, I
that
will.
offline.
So please do, yeah.
All right, thank you. Nobody else from the public who wishes to speak? All right, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor, once again, of accepting the 2023 annual financial report signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That then brings us to another financial matter this evening, which is to receive our first quarter budget amendment and financial report. And for that, we've got our Finance Director, Michelle Petrick, back up with us.
Good evening.
Welcome, Ms. Petrick.
So normally the quarterly financial statement goes on consent. However, we're doing a budget amendment, which the city hasn't done for several years. So we thought we would discuss it during business items. And if I can open this. All right, there. Full screen. So when we did the 24 budget, we had a line item for contingency, which was in the general fund, because at that point in time, we did not have the full implementation of the compensation classification study. And so the first budget amendment is allocating the contingency because it was designed for the tax-supported funds. And so we've run the numbers through the personnel budget for 24, and Parks and Recreation personnel expenses increase is 78,840. Communications increase is 17,330. So the expenses increase, but the property taxes also increase, and they're moving from the general fund. In the general fund, you can see the administration, elections, finance, police, fire, public works, administration, streets, and garage. All of those divisions, the personnel costs are increased. And the contingency / property taxes was already in the general fund.
This also included settled union contracts in the police department. In the case of the non-tax supported funds, we are increasing the expenses for personnel costs. There is no tax implication. The revenues that were budgeted within these funds should be sufficient to cover these increased expenses. And if they aren't sufficient at year end, there are sufficient reserves within those funds. But based on the current analysis, it appears revenues will be sufficient to cover these increased costs by more than the increases in some cases. So that's the first budget amendment that we proposed. The second one is for the BCA grant-funded police investigator. The council approved accepting the funding back in January. And what should have occurred was a budget amendment when that came before the council, because we will be receiving revenue and we will be expending dollars for the specific investigator, which weren't part of the '24 budget. Which is why if we don't amend the budget, we could theoretically look like we're overspending the budget and also receiving more revenue than anticipated. So this is kind of the best practices that most cities do occasionally go through for these types of situations. So with that, if you have any questions.
Questions for staff? Yeah. Councilmember Schroeder? Everybody's looking at you.
I asked my questions earlier.
Okay. Can you send them to Cynthia?
Actually, she answered it all right there.
All right. Very good. Well, with that, we'll certainly open it up for public comment as well, if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this budget amendment proposal. All right, seeing no one, then we've got the request before us to, I'm just double checking to see if it was single resolution or was it multiple actions? Single resolution for all of the required actions. All right, so we've got that resolution attachment 1 in the packet. That's the requested action.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I'm going to make sure I put this in the right spot. All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to approve that resolution, attachment 1, under this item in the agenda, which will adopt and approve those changes and amendments to the budget. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember Groff is the maker.
Not so much that, but I did appreciate the notes you put in, because some of this is very helpful to know that, state aids are received in May, September, and October, so that funds going in and out are at different times, and that explains a lot of the variance, over the calendar year for us.
Right. Councilmember Schroeder is the seconder. Right, other discussion? And I think that's exactly the thing that you have to note, is that a lot of times we can't just wait till we get the money from other sources to pay our people. They get paid on a weekly or biweekly basis regardless, and we have to pay our bills within 30 days by state law. So those charges keep happening, and despite the fact that we don't have the revenue coming in, and which is one of the reasons that we have our policy to have a nice healthy reserve to cover the cash flow. So appreciate that. With that, we've got the motion once again to adopt the resolution approving the amendments to the 2024 budget. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That resolution is approved. Those amendments are approved. That then brings us to item D, which is to consider approval of a commercial police officer agreement with the Rosedale Center and the City of Roseville for 2024 to 2027. And this is so substantial that we've got the chief and the deputy chief here with us this evening. And we appreciate you being here to bring this item before the council this evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for allowing us to come and present on this really important contract that we're excited to be bringing forward. We didn't put together any kind of formal presentation. I'm just going to do a quick kind of overview of how we got to this point, and then we just wanted an opportunity to open it up for any questions you might have. quick history is when I started over 25 years ago, we had a commercial patrol unit. And just over time and needs and allocation of resources, that kind of went by the wayside. But the last 10 years, we've really been looking at how we can get commercial patrol back, especially as we've seen some of the challenges that our retail centers are facing. When Rosedale built the additional AMC or the theater and started adding on the plaza, we definitely saw an increase in just the types of calls that we were seeing at the mall. Fast forward to when they put on the new edition of the Von Mar and some of the other businesses, we are also started to see more calls for service and just a drain on our overall resources. And this by no means is Rosedale's an unsafe place. We've just found that over the last, especially probably over about the last 5-6 years, retail centers have just become a place where you do have to worry about things like active shooters or people with weapons and carjackings. So again, this is not something just impacting our community. Rosedale's a very safe place, but just across the country, we're seeing some new challenges with our retail centers. Really starting back in 2019, we sat down with Lisa Crane and the management to talk about what can we do to address some of these spikes that we were seeing. Had some great conversations going, and then the pandemic hit and everything kind of went on the back burner. There was obviously a lot more going on with the pandemic and also civil unrest, so kind of pushed those conversations to the side. And then you fast forward to 2022, and that's when we were really starting to see kind of concerning and violent things happening at our malls. We had a couple carjackings, we were seeing shootings across the country, and so really engaged with Rosedale Center again, like what can we do differently? I'll give a lot of credit to Lisa Crane, the vice president there. She's like, we need to get officers in here. They were concerned, they didn't want to wait until there was a big story in Roseville. And so they've been hiring off-duty officers in the short term to really address and partner with the retailers. And it's not just about having more police officers there, it's partnering with the businesses, it's partnering with the management, and just being a resource to the security department that has remained. So as we moved forward with the off-duty, they really saw some positive results. The crime started to go down. They heard from their retail managers that people felt safer, just a lot of positive things. And so that's how these conversations started of how do we make this long-term sustainable. And so about a year ago, they came back to us that they were willing to fund 2 police officers to be dedicated to the mall. At that time, our staffing levels were a little bit challenging, and so we said, hey, let's continue on with the off-duty until we're in a better place that I feel that we can actually make that commitment. And so that's why we're bringing this forward here today and kind of how we got to this point. Just a few things that I'm going to highlight in the contract. Obviously, there's a lot of detail in the RCA, but just a few things to highlight for the council. Rosedale Center would fund the majority of the expenses with the 2 dedicated officers. They would be covering the salary, benefits, and the vehicle. There are some minimal costs that the police department will have to incur, and we believe that we can, with our existing budget, some forfeiture funds, and possibly some donations, fund some of the other things to make this happen, things like the vest and the gear that these 2 additional officers would need. Our plan would be to assign 2 experienced officers, so we wouldn't be hiring for these positions a brand new officer. You really need some experience to jump into this. So we would post it and then we would backfill 2 new officers to come in. I think it's also important to note that there's no city obligation to continue these after the end of the agreement. Our hope is it's so successful that Rosedale wants to continue or that we might be able to find grants, but there is no obligation that if Rosedale decided they didn't want to continue, that the city would need to continue these positions. Right now, we would project that September of 2024 is when we would start this agreement. Council has made some great investments in our CSO, our interns, and we've done a really great job at recruiting. And looking ahead, we believe that in September of 2024, so in a couple months now, we will be at our authorized strength, which I will tell you across the metro is really rare. We still have a lot of departments that are really struggling. We're pretty comfortable where we're at, and that's why we're bringing this forward. And then just one other thing to note is, to clarify, these officers aren't going to replace security guards. That's not their role. We would be responding to crime. We're seeing a lot more just violent behaviors with shoplifters, so it's those kind of things that hopefully we can deter Also focusing on the retail groups that are hitting across the country that literally come in and just clean out stores in a matter of minutes. So it would not take on a security role where we're enforcing mall rules, but really focusing on violent crime, a deterrence, and being a partner to our businesses. And obviously, there's a lot of benefits to our community. Probably the biggest one is the officers that work that district now can focus on the other businesses and the residential areas instead of always being kind of brought back to handle things at Rosedale. This gives them dedicated resources and frees up our other officers to respond. And also just that familiarity, to be able to have officers that know that mall, they know the staff. There really is a lot of benefits for that. Unfortunately, Lisa Crane could not be here tonight. She was sick, so I know she was planning to be here, but I just want to say she has been a tremendous partner and really has been instrumental in getting this going when we first started talking back in 2019. In my 25 years, I think this is probably the best relationship that we've had with Rosedale, and realizing we all have to partner together. You know, police can't just arrest our way out of this situation. We need everybody coming together. So just a shout out to her. I was going to say that she would be here to answer questions, but I dragged Joe Adams up here as well. He's been working closely with her on kind of going through this contract. But either Joe or I are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you for bringing this forward and for all the work that it took to get to this point, and for being thoughtful about how it works with our staffing levels and things like that. I know that has been definitely a challenge, as you noted, across the industry, so to speak, and certainly in the metro area here. So very much appreciative of that. Are there questions from council members for staff? Councilmember Strawn.
Thank you. I've noted that there are often cars, police car squads, especially on the movie side, out on the perimeter. Is that someone who normally patrols that area, and would they maintain that presence even with the 2 officers inside Rosedale, or affiliated specifically?
Yeah, so there are some days where it might be the officer assigned to that district that you're seeing. We also have, we allow for the exterior person that's working the exterior perimeter that Rosedale pays for.
Okay.
They do have use of a squad because we need that equipment, the defibrillators, everything that, the computers. And so there is typically a squad that's present at the mall that's paid for by Rosedale Center.
Okay.
This would replace those off-duty officers that are there now. We do envision that there's still going to be some off-duty work. For instance, Apple hires off-duty officers inside their store, so they're actually paying for a dedicated officer, not a squad car, but just an officer to be present. Those will continue, but the off-duty that Rosedale has been paying, that funding is going to go to dedicating 2 officers.
Thank you. And can you just speak to your rebound in staffing and what you attribute that to? Obviously, it's a big change compared to other agencies in the area.
I'm going to let Joe take that one because I think the majority of his day is spent recruiting and working on a retention effort, so he might have some insights, and then I can chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thank you, Councilmember Strawn, for that question. And we've been extremely fortunate, and I think a lot of it, the Chief had already mentioned, has been direct support of you all. We're trying some innovative things within our police department that a lot of people are catching on to do now. But we were an early, I don't know if you want to call it recognizer of the fact that our candidate pool, just in the general realm, was dwindling. And so we knew we needed to try something different and get on the front end of it. And it was at that time that we worked with you all on increasing our budget and staffing in our CSOs, starting to pay our interns. I thought that was a really big piece, and we were actually really innovative in that, just recognizing that previous internships, when you'd work for free, not everybody can do that. And we were attracting a certain type of candidate, which was fine, but as we wanted to try to diversify our police department, that was a huge piece of it. Now, when we get students in as interns, they then want to become our CSOs. And when our CSOs work for us, they now want to become police officers. And so we almost call it like a farm club, like a baseball team, where we're growing our own, and it's finally coming to fruition now, where in the next 4 months, we have 4 different people that were interns, then CSOs, then cadets, and now becoming police officers. And so the candidate pool has not really gotten much better. In fact, I think it's gotten worse, but we found a way to develop our own employees. And again, that took some financial support and some outside the box thinking from Chief, from you all, from Pat, and we're extremely thankful for it, and it is paying off huge.
Thank you.
Councilmember Graff.
Just a couple of things I want to be clear on. The Rosedale Center is committed to constructing the police substation there, and that'll be used by our officers that are stationed there, and also a vehicle. Is that correct from my reading of the report? So those will be covered by them. I think that everything else in here is pretty self-explanatory. I didn't have any other questions. I wanted to make sure that was correct. Thanks. And kudos for that, being ahead of the game on finding people to put into the pipeline. That was brilliant.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and actually, I have talked to the management at Rosedale, and I have actually been impressed what partners they are, working with the city, of course, with your department, and so I'm really pleased that they're willing to do this, and I too had been looking at that car originally, and it was nice to see that they're willing to pay for that as well. I mean, to have another vehicle is going to be really nice. I really support this idea. I think this is a wonderful thing. I think Rosedale is a big draw for Roseville, and we want to make sure and keep that safe. My question is, would you be giving us some updates as it goes along to how it's going, so we understand if it's working well or if the crime's going down we have regular updates is my question.
Yes, we absolutely can, and I know Lisa was planning to be here tonight to even talk to some of the success we've seen in the last couple of years, but absolutely, we could make sure that we're coming back to council with updates.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Bratton.
I have a question about the two officers. Will they be rotating their shifts? They're not on at the same time? Is that correct? Or are they on the same time at just higher interest times?
That's a great question, and we've been speaking with not only Rosedale, but our police officers, because we want to make sure that's an attractive place for the officers to be too. And that's been some of our discussion is obviously if we say you're gonna have to work every single weekend, there's gonna be no officer that's gonna want to do that. And so it will be a variable shift where they will work together sometimes, but not other days too, because obviously Rosedale wants us to expand our coverage with those two officers. But there is some foot patrols and things that you're able to do with two officers that you simply cannot do with one. But that specific schedule has not been laid out yet, just with the general understanding of the officers aren't gonna wanna work every single week and aren't gonna wanna work by themselves every single time, but we'll find some middle ground in there to be most effective for both entities.
All right, thank you. And the reassurance that Rosedale is maintaining their security at the same level, so that team isn't changing?
Correct, yes.
All right.
I'll just add that they really have, the last couple of years, really invested in their security
Okay,
over there.
good.
Since we started these conversations in 2019, it really has been a really strong partnership, and they really have, I think they're really committed to making sure that Rosedale stays a safe place for people to visit and to shop. So and I think that really is Lisa Crane's leadership over there. So just want to call that out. They've really stepped things up.
I really appreciate it, because the last time I was on I guess it's been a few years since I was on a ride-along. We spent a lot of time there, and I don't think that partnership was where you're talking about right now.
For sure.
So that's great to hear. I want to point out a few things that I really appreciate in the contract. Probably the most important one is, as we've talked about concerns about staffing and excellent work on your part to bring forward programs and to find new officers for us, to grow your own program, but the clause allowing us to pull back officers if we drop below minimums for what we need to do to serve the broader community. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that this person is going to be in that partnership role, trying to work to improve safety and security within the mall with individual stores and things like that we can have some proactive element to this, and so we're not easy targets and things like that. So I appreciate that is part of this agreement.
Right. I was thinking about how or whether to ask this question, but I'm going to anyway, because maybe we need to put some folks on the spot. Are there other shopping centers within Roseville that have either currently or are looking at similar types of arrangements, either to what we've been doing with Rosedale prior to this or something like this? Can you speak to that at all without obviously giving away negotiation secrets or anything like that?
No, I will say, we We have seen more off-duty requests coming in, more than we can even staff. I think, a lot of stores are really struggling. They're seeing an increase in violence. I just talked to another retailer who had an assault of their loss prevention officers in the last week, and we're really concerned. So we're trying to partner with them. I know there's a lot of stores, a lot of retail centers that would just love to hire a police officer, but we don't have the staffing
Right.
to be able to do that. And so we're trying to work with them. What steps can they take to improve their business so that they don't need to hire an officer? And it gets really expensive for a lot of these retailers. They can't afford sustainable coverage the way that Rosedale did large retailers like Walmart. And so we're really trying to be a resource to these businesses and give them the tools, certainly stepping up our patrols and working with them. So those are ongoing, and that's open to any of our businesses that are experiencing, significant losses or they're having trouble with theft. We've got our community action team that will go out and actually meet with them on things that they can do. And also our community relations, Tom Pitzel. Because there's a lot you can do besides putting a security guard or a police officer at the door. And so we're happy to work with any retailers that want to try to improve the safety of their store.
Well, and perhaps, as you were saying, because of this arrangement with Rosedale, that also frees up resources to do those types of things elsewhere in the community, and certainly the need is there. I think that, as you know, we had heard from a CEO of one of the stores in Roseville, and he had reached out to a number of the leadership in various communities in Twin Cities that he had recently visited, and he was hearing from his employees how unsafe they felt as employees in that retail environment. And so I think it's important that we're being that resource, but also being effective in how we can most effectively help these businesses and their customers. So appreciate that, and hopefully this just helps. With that, we'll check if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening, this proposed arrangement with Rosedale. Anyone from the public? All right, seeing no one, once again, we've got the request before us to approve entering into this agreement with Rosedale for the two officers as outlined. Is there a motion from the council?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, second by Councilmember Bratton to enter into that agreement, or authorize entering into that agreement. Discussion on the motion as the maker, Councilmember Schroeder.
I just think it's a great thing. I'm really happy we're doing this.
And as the seconder?
I agree.
All right, other discussion on the motion? All right, I know we've covered a lot already in our discussion this evening, so thank you, everyone, thank you. And with that, all those in favor of approving entering into that agreement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We look forward to getting that underway. Thank you again. That brings us to our next business item, item 7E, which is to return to discussing the Kids in Need Foundation state bonding request. And this is an item that was before the city council at our last meeting, I believe it was, and we had asked for some additional information in order to consider this item. And so I'll turn it over to City Manager Pat Trudgeon to bring that to us and reintroduce this to us for consideration.
Mr. Mayor, just brought to my attention that there's a second motion as far as that last case to do the budget amendment for this. We just talked about that previously. but
Budget
we want to
amendment?
take it
Okay,
now,
got it.
part of that. It's in the
Got it.
RCA. if you
Right.
look at the RCA.
Yeah, see, our finance director is like, where's my budget amendment? All right, so time out on this item, and we'll return back to that second requested item, the approval of the budget amendment related
Yeah.
to the agreement with Rosedale. Is there a motion on that item?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, second by Councilmember Strawn. Discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and the budget amendment is approved. The finance director can relax. At least on that topic. All right, that then brings us to to Mr. Trudgeon telling us about the information that we've got to supplement what we had at our last discussion related to the Kids in Need Foundation state bonding request and the city's role in that regard. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the introduction here. And as you mentioned, we did talk about it at the April 22nd meeting, and there were some questions and some additional information that the council wanted to learn about. And our city attorney, Rachel Tierney, along with her colleagues, I believe Ms. Toller and Ms. Fiorini, helped put together this quite lengthy memo, but very important memo, talking about the obligations for the city and what would be involved and what would be possible ways to mitigate maybe some of the risk or the concerns that were raised and talk about a pathway moving forward. I know I have Ms. Fiorini joining us by Zoom if you have any particular questions. I don't have an exact presentation about all the particular details of what it is, but suffice to say that there are obligations for the city to take on with this. There are pathways that were outlined that would allow us to do that, and which would mean going into a lot of side agreements with whether it's Kids in Need Foundations or other consultants to help us with that. I think even with that, though, there is still a large amount of time city staff would have to spend over the years monitoring the situation, doing reports, and making sure everything is done properly. So with that, I will pause to see if our collection of city attorneys have any follow-up to say anything, and/or just go into questions. And I know representatives of Kid in Need Foundation are here as well.
Okay. We will start with questions from the council for staff or our legal representation on the information that's been presented. And I did want to note as well that I think one of the things that was asked about at our last discussion was other cities' experiences in similar arrangements. And I know, Mr. Trudden, you had indicated that you had attempted to do some outreach at the recent City Managers Association meetings and didn't have a lot of new information to provide in that regard.
That's correct. Nothing that they could explain to me during our meetings here to really get into any depth. I do know our city attorney's law firm, Kennedy and Graven, represents a lot of these cities, so they could probably speak to it a little bit better. But I did try to outreach and really didn't get any new information.
Okay. No, I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know that was a specific request that the council had had. So to that extent, certainly if our attorneys can address some of that, that would be helpful as well. And I see Ms. Tierney is probably the person who's been working with some of those communities and can provide some of the insight in that regard.
It's a different chair. Feels weird here. I did check with several colleagues. I will say one of the differences in the attorneys that I spoke with, the city attorneys that I spoke with, was that a lot of times it had been a cooperative effort to solve a problem between a nonprofit and the city. So that it's just a unique situation where you've been proposed with an idea as opposed to being involved at the front end of the idea. But with that said, most of the cities were willing participants and didn't have as many of the concerns that this council has, but and I'm sure Gina can weigh in as well. The other thing that I'll say is well, I'll leave it at that. Of the other cities didn't examine as much as you have about the full implications, didn't look at the front end about what are the requirements of the state law and do that full examination until later in the process. And many of them ultimately did agree to continue with the process.
Right. And specifically, I think one of the things that comes to mind is as Mr. Trudgen sort of alluded to, is some of the staff work that needs to be done to, regardless of whether we use attorneys to help with agreements or consultants to help with construction management or some of those things, some of the compliance does require our own staff time to make sure things are submitted properly, and we have an annual requirement, I think, to approve a budget by the city, and so that'll be council time in a meeting, whether that's a consent item or whatever it might be. So there's some of that, and I don't know to what extent those communities have expressed anything about their experience in terms of the burden on staff, either Ms. Fiorini or Ms. Tierney or anyone.
Mr. Mayor, I can speak a little bit to that. I would agree with what Rachel said. I think many of the projects I've been involved in or our firm has been involved in, it's been a real partnership. So, the staff time or the budget time, it might have been more of a cooperative type of project to begin with, where, the city and the nonprofit are sort of doing something together. So, I don't think I have any specific feedback about, how much staff time it took specifically.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Other questions from council members? I didn't mean to ask all the questions. Councilmember Etten, and then...
Thank you to our entire legal team for being here.
We might be missing somebody.
Okay, well, three wonderful people. Thinking about the long-term implications, maybe more than the yearly implications, part of the RCA, the request for council action here, and your letter, Ms. Tierney, talks about the ability to sell the property if Kids in Need Foundation, in this specific case, ceased to exist or couldn't meet the obligations set out by the state, that the property can be sold and that the first part of the money goes back to the state for that. But the next paragraph says to make sure that potential future buyers or lenders of the facility are aware of the limitations imposed, and seems to suggest that, let's say we're 20 years in, we're supposed to go to 30 to 40. We sell it at 20 years. Does the property, whoever buys it next, still have to use it for that, even though the state has been paid back?
I'm going to defer to Gina on this question.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think, if the nonprofit ever goes out of business, there's still a long-term lease and a long-term declaration recorded against the property that it has to be used for these purposes for 125% of the useful life. So we're talking probably somewhere between 40 and 50 years here. And I think at that point, it's important to remember that the city's interest is a ground lease. So what we're talking about selling is really your ground lease interest long-term. And I think if the nonprofit goes away, there'd be a number of things the city would need to do. I think that, the first thing is, trying to find someone else to sort of operate that governmental program, what you got the money for. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that, is going to be possible. And then at that point, it's probably going to take some conversations with the state of, we can't find anybody else that's sort of doing something similar. And then at that point, I think the city would need to make a finding that maybe the property would no longer be able to be used for the governmental program, again, with the state support. And then at that point, you would be, going through the process with the state of potentially selling the property, and they at that point would potentially be willing to remove that declaration as well. I will say that I think if we're in a workout situation here, if the nonprofit goes out of business, I think there's, the nonprofit might also have a lender on this property that's going to have an interest in how this all works out. So I do think there might be some uncertainty in multiple parties that probably would need to be satisfied at that point. And again, I think MMB will be very heavily involved. They have their own requirements and their own process that, they want to go through when a project is sold. So I think there would be, some complexity, but I do think the option would be there that it would be able to be sold to, for a different use, if there's really sort of no way forward.
Okay.
But again, sorry, just one more point too. A reminder that, if it is sold, the city's likely not going to be getting any money from that sale. It's going to be going back to MMB. Potentially some of the money is going to be going to the lender, if there is one. So, I think there's I think there'd be a little bit of question of what money would go where, but, I don't think the city would get anything from that.
Yeah, as long as the city wasn't paying, that's
I think that's the good
that's
follow-up.
the greater concern would be, or do we end up with a building, people continue to work from home, you end up with a building that you can't sell? Or could we be on the hook for, say, $2 million to give it back to the state?
I think that it's probably pretty unlikely that the state would ask the city itself to repay that full $2 million, even though you're sort of in the middle here. I think that the state understands that this is a sub-grant type of situation where you're really the middle person. So I think that they would be, if there's nothing that can be done with, when you look at sort of the language of the grant agreement, I think they're want it to be sold for fair market value. And if we're really in a situation where office buildings or, buildings aren't selling and, maybe the fair market value of that ground lease interest is $5, and that's sort of what you'd be obligated to pay the state back. Could they technically perhaps ask you to repay the grant funds? Potentially, but I don't think they would ask this. Maybe they would, but I really think from a politics perspective that they're not going to ask, city taxpayers to repay that grant that was meant to flow through the nonprofit.
Okay, I'll be quiet for now.
And just to
Thank
that
you.
point,
That isn't for sure.
I imagine that the standard agreement for the grant agreement with the state, we probably can't slip a term in there that says, oh, by the way, under no circumstances is the city obligated to pay back the grant funds, or something like that, as much as we might like to. Okay.
Mr.
I'm getting nodding.
Mr. Mayor, you're correct. The grant agreement is, it's a state form. We can try to mark it up with as many things as we want, but the answer is usually no. This is, they're giving money, so they're sort of like, take it or leave it.
Thank you for letting me do that follow-up. Other questions, Councilmember Strawn?
In follow-up to that as well, so right now, we're looking at the fair market value of the building and the land. Is that correct? And that's what we're financing, is the purchase of the building and the land? Or just the land?
I think the bonding dollars, the $5 million from the state, an additional $5 million raised by Kids in Need would cover the purchase of the property and the remodeling that they need to do and the improvements that they need to do in the property. So we have the whole project from the land into the building improvements as well to carry out their mission.
So I think this speaks to my concern about what the physical life of that particular physical building is. I don't know about the adjacent building, but the one that has been the Department of Education seemed to have a propensity to have its windows pop out in the last few years. If you drive by, they just seem to be gone. And so I just wonder, I don't want to be having an expectation that the life of this project is 40 years when the remaining life of that particular building might not be without substantial remodeling and upkeep. And so I think I echo Councilmember Etton's concern of this possibility of loss in that sale. And if we're purchasing a building on a piece of land, obviously it generally has more value than if we're just purchasing a piece of land. So if the building is no longer operable, of course, time, who knows, that might become a more valuable spot. I don't know. That's our realtor.
That's commercial real
Large
estate.
commercial real estate.
I do have one other question. What do you see, and I think this is for one of the attorneys and either, what do you see as the expectations of our council to other nonprofits that office or headquarter themselves out of Roseville in this situation? So if we were to take on one entity who's asked us in this situation, when we have many others, I mean, more than 2 or 3, who headquarter themselves out of Roseville, does this set a precedent that we might feel like we're obligated to maintain for other nonprofits moving forward?
I might jump in for the benefit of the attorneys and say that that's probably a policy question for the people sitting here to decide, as opposed to the attorney. I'm sure the attorney's advice is there's legally no obligation if you make a commitment to one entity that you have to make any commitment to any other entity in this regard.
Councilmember, yes. I don't think that there's any legal obligation to extend this same offer to any other entity for any other project. You may feel an obligation, you may have political pressure, but legally, there's no obligation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Groff.
Just speaking to that, it seems like each situation that would come in would be a different situation, asking for different amounts of bond money, a different building, so I think that we can analyze each one of those separately. But I was wondering if you have any experience or are there any throughout the state where they have gone under, where the city has had to repay the bond to the state or the amount of money? Are there any examples where this went down a bad road?
Members of the council, I am not aware of any. I am aware of one project where the nonprofit went out of business, but it happened to happen before the project actually got built, so the grant funds were never expended. One thing, just to note about the way these grants work and the way the legislation is drafted here is it does require the nonprofit to, to fundraise their own amounts first. So theoretically, the goal, I think of that, the way the state drafts these is so that they know the project is sort of ready to go, and at least the nonprofit has enough funds to complete the project before they'll start dispersing their own state funds. And that's what happened in the situation I was aware of. So there was, no loss to the city other than the time everyone spent sort of negotiating the documents, because they didn't end up getting everything they needed to get done to get the state money at all.
So
Rachel knows of anything else, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, I don't know the project that went upside down, but I certainly do know of challenges that have happened during the construction process, making sure the state requirements are met and things of that nature. I think that most of the risk to the city actually takes place during that construction process and resolving those issues. Generally, and I want to say always, those end up being resolved, but that can be a demand on staff time. It can be politically complicated and all of those things that happen. But I think most of the things that go wrong tend to go wrong during the construction process rather than after.
Yep.
Just addressing the construction issue and probably a little bit of what Councilmember Strawn was asking about. From my understanding, this is going to be a total renovation of the building. So I would expect like windows and insulation and all those sorts of things. But when will we know those details? What's being done and what isn't? Where does that fall in the process?
Councilmember Groff, council members, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I think generally, again, this is just the order of operations here is just a little different than is typical.
Yep.
I would expect that if you were to pose those questions to Kids in Need Foundation, they would answer them as best they could. They may have all the answers right now.
Okay, thanks.
And there will be that opportunity too. And Councilmember Schroeder.
Okay, I have a few questions. First, you talked about some of these cities that have done it. What size cities were they? Were they our size? Were they bigger cities that took on something like this?
So I'm aware of, I think Minneapolis and St. Paul regularly do projects like this. I've been involved in sort of mixed, more sort of public-private partnership type projects in, large suburban communities as well. And, a couple projects in outstate Minnesota too. But I think it's sort of, it can vary.
Okay, and then, could this be amended, and I don't even know if this is an option, say if the county, Ramsey County took the place of the city of Roseville, is that an option? Could this be amended where they could step in? Well, first of all, can they step in, or is that allowed? And two, what would it take to have someone other than Roseville step in?
Councilmember Schroeder, I know I can think of a project that both Siobhan and I are aware of in St. Paul, where it was originally going to be a St. Paul project, and then Ramsey County took it over for a variety of reasons. So again, Ramsey County gets to choose whether they want to do that, just like Roseville gets to choose whether it wants to do that. So Ramsey County would potentially be an option.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And this is a little bit of a technical question. In your letter, you're talking about that the city has to report to MMB annually in a statement sworn between a notary public, the real property required to annually review projected budgets, to verify the project revenues. And basically it says we have an obligation to reject or inaccurate or unbalanced budgets, and then we have to certify it. So, okay, one, it seems like, do we have to have our own auditor go in and verify that? And two, what is the consequence if we certify and there turns out to be a statement in there that's incorrect, or this ends up not being a correct audit?
Gina can jump in if she wants to correct me. Yeah. As a practical matter, the way that the city would manage that is you would require Kids in Need Foundation to hire an outside auditor that would go through all of that paperwork and certify that for you. So you would look at it, but you would be more of a rubber stamp of their work. I don't know what MMB would do if they found an error in what had been approved. I don't know what level of scrutiny they apply to what cities certify.
Okay. And the last one is just a comment, I think this is what Councilmember Graff talked about, is others haven't had the opportunity to come forward, and so, you know, just these guys are the first one to ask and in place, but we didn't have a process to figure out, should we allow others to, if we were gonna do this, how would we do it, and how would we determine who would be the ones we'd want to finance on this? So I'm a little, you know, I'm not so sure how many would want to do this, but that it gets down back to if we do this, then what about the other people coming and saying, well, what about us? We didn't get the opportunity to even compete for that. So that it's more of a comment, but that is a concern I have, so.
Well, and just to be clear on one thing, this isn't a competition situation where somebody else is, you know, not getting this because kids in need. In this case, they are the ones that made the request to the state, and the state is considering their request. So the question would be, is the policy question about the city, you know, do we want to do these? How many do we want to do? Do we have criteria if we're making a choice? Do we need to have a criteria and all those things, which I think we'll have to have that conversation about. But it's, at least we're thinking about that. Before I recognize Councilmember Etten, I did want to ask a couple of fairly technical questions just to help me understand the process, because as we know, we have to do, first of all, the agreement with MMB, the grant agreement between us and them. And then we have the lease agreement with Kids Need Foundation to establish that ownership interest. I think it was called the ground lease. We can't charge rent on that. That's just it's a paper transaction essentially. Then there's the lease back and the management agreement. And I wasn't 100% sure in that if there is a financial transaction part of that where Kids Need Foundation would be paying something to the city as part of that lease and management agreement, other than perhaps the management the costs of the management consultant or whatever that might be. Can that be clarified a little bit to make sure I understand what that financial aspect of that agreement would be?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, the lease and management agreement, or what the state often will call a use agreement, the city really can't charge any sort of fees for its services under that agreement. I think that you could, the way the state's written requirements are, if you look at sort of their use checklists for what can be in these contracts, is that it can only be sort of operations and maintenance expenses can be charged. I think what the city could do is charge some sort of separate administrative fee at the beginning to try to cover some of your staff time. You know, we need to make sure that MMB is comfortable with that. I'm aware of one other city that does that, but you know, lots don't. So we want to make sure MMB is okay with that. But I think what you would do is, you know, just sort of charge a fee at the beginning rather than an ongoing fee.
All right, but specific to the construction management part of it, is that something that would be part of this agreement?
Yes.
Or is that yet another agreement where those costs would be covered?
Correct. I think you would have require them to hire a construction management consultant. And I think, you know, what Rachel was mentioning as well, we put provisions in the agreement where it says that, you know, they'd have to have an auditor review sort of their budget information so the city can make sure that any financial information it's received, it's, you know, it's comfortable relying on it, and any sort of other, you know, technical requirements that we'd want them to comply with.
Okay, so it's the things that we can charge back to kids in need for those types of costs where that would be incorporated into this lease and management agreement or use agreement, and maybe potentially, depending on what it is, yet another agreement? Or is it all pretty much encompassed into that use and management or lease and management agreement?
Mr. Mayor, I think we could include it all in one. Certainly it'd be simpler to have fewer documents.
Sure. No, and I definitely agree with that. And then do we know, there was some comment in the memo about whether this is an end grant or if it's a construction grant, and there's a different level of what the city has to do in terms of making requests for disbursements, as opposed to sort of, it just kind of is more like one payment at the end, it sounded like. Do we know what this one is? I couldn't find in the legislation any language that told me that. And we may have to get that clarified by others who may know.
Mr. Mayor, I am not sure about that. Kids in Need Foundation might be able to answer some of that for us. I do know that the state's general preference is that these are done as end grants because it's simpler for them to only disperse once too.
Sure.
But certainly I've seen them done as, multiple draws as well.
All right, thank you for clarifying that too. That was the question I had. Councilmember Etten?
Yeah, I had one more question about, here we have this thing that I've never heard of, but that doesn't mean anything, right? How long has this legal financial option been available in the state of Minnesota? Are we talking 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? What are we looking at? What's the history on this? When we talk about things not having failed before, if it's been around for
6
10
months.
years, then we have to count on it for 40. It's a,
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so this has been around for a long time. I don't know how, at least for as long as I've been practicing this public finance law, so, 13 years. And I think it's been around before then. So where this all comes from is in the memo, is the Minnesota Constitution has a requirement that buildings or anything that's financed with state general obligation bonds has to be publicly owned. So this system to allow nonprofits to get access to these state bond funds has been around for a while. Rachel might have more of a historical knowledge than me, but it's been around before I started practicing. It's not something new.
I can't put a date on it for you, but Minneapolis and St. Paul have been doing this for many, many years. Children's Museum, Science Museum, I think the River Center, were all started this way.
okay. All right, thank you.
We have other questions from the council at this time? All right. I do want to provide an opportunity for representatives from Kids in Need who are here this evening once again with us to perhaps help fill in any information that came up in the questions or clarify any points that still need clarification. We appreciate that. And so if you can just introduce yourselves again and feel free to provide insight for us and help us through the process.
Good evening, council members. My name is Melissa Reed. I'm a government relations professional. I'm representing Kids in Need Foundation this evening, so thank you so much for having us here today.
Mayor, Council, thank you again. Corey Gordon, CEO of Kids in Need Foundation.
All right. And I don't know if you heard anything in our questions and answers and discussion that you wanted to help clarify or any other information you wanted to add. Here's your chance. Otherwise, if you want to stand for questions, we'll see if we've got some for you.
No, I think, I think with the prior meeting, there were a lot of questions, and the questions, at least the way they came across to us, was really based on the fact that this is new, right? And so I do appreciate the council looking at it from that perspective. Sometimes new, for some people, is kind of almost an automatic no, and I was concerned that the council not take it that way, but I do appreciate the fact that you all wanted to get expert opinion. I did take heart in the fact that the city attorney is, the law firm that your city attorney is from, represents probably more cities that are involved in the GO bond process than any other firm. So we were, I think, took confidence in the fact that you were going to get good expert counsel, right? Just and the fact that they have done that, and many of the recent bonds as well, not just Minneapolis, which I think Councilmember Edmund, you mentioned last week, is a different animal, or last time was a different animal, and you weren't particularly interested in just that case study. But when you look at St. Paul, or when you look at Brooklyn Park, Rosemont most recently, and others, they are of varying sizes to the question that you asked, Councilman Schroeder. So I think it's from that perspective, the fact that it hasn't been done in Roseville before, I guess I can't comment on that in terms of why no other organization would have stepped forward to be a part of that. But I think that when that question came up last, I mentioned a lot of it is just how many nonprofits in Roseville are working with the state legislator, working with to enact a GO bond process. Overall, city manager mentioned this is a $10 million all-in figure, if you will, and so we will well understand that 5 of that would need to come from us. If there's an opportunity to go through the GO bond process and bring state funding, we're not asking for city to pay for that, we're looking for state funding for that. that is something we're obviously going to look at. There aren't a lot of available properties for what we're looking for in the city of Roseville. And so when we first met with the city last summer, this was actually, the property we're talking about was actually surfaced by the city staff. We received, if I remember right, I think we received a listing of 5 different properties for us to look into and research. We met with on all 5 of them, and I've lost track of how many conversations I've had with Steve Wellington, both the owner of Wellington, but also the current owner of the property on this property. And this was, again, in all fairness, was surfaced by, and the introduction was made by the city of Roseville. And so I think that was a good faith effort on the city to say we would like to keep Kids in Need Foundation here. This wasn't a matter of us trying to play hardball. It was really, it's practically speaking, we need a facility. Is there one that's suitable? The building itself is not the Minnesota Department of Education building, just to clarify. It's the National American University building. Poetic justice means that we get to go in where this for-profit university was, right? So that's the building in question. There is an extensive remodel. It's not a tear down, anything like that situation, obviously. But for example, it's really not designed to do any type of warehouse or any type of storage type. It was really cubicle farm, right? And so because you have low drop ceilings, well, that would not accommodate the type of work we're doing. So we'd be taking off the drop ceiling and take it back to kind of the original. It has some beautiful windows. Not the pop-out windows, but the beautiful, and we'd love to be able to have that for the teachers, bring in that natural light. It has a lot of classroom space, which we would like, because part of what we want to be able to do is not just continue supporting the teachers and students in the way we're currently doing. We're also looking to incorporate some of the workforce development aspects that we've been talking to the city, the superintendent from Roseville School District, some of the things they're working on. What can we do together, especially for juniors and seniors, in terms of workforce development, to make sure that they can stay in school, graduate, but once they graduate and have a diploma, they can also have a certificate that gives them a job that's beyond just minimum wage. It's living wage, it's actual living income, livable income, it's full-time benefits, those types of things. And so that additional classroom space that's available there already, we would be able to tap into that. But 60,000 of it, roughly, that we estimate would need to be renovated. So that way, so the overall bill that we're looking at, 10 million, that would be funds that we have been setting aside to do some of that construction work.
Great. Are there any questions from the council for the representatives of Kids in Need? Councilmember Bratton?
I think you partially answered. I was going to ask, as I thought before you had said the National American University piece, but a lot of our materials talk about the Department of Ed building, but they are considered separate buildings. So the purchase is only for the property that was National American University.
That is correct.
And you anticipate using all of that property?
Correct, yes. So, yes and no. I mean, 60,000 of it is for kind of existing program and expansion of the existing. The other part of it is for the new program expansion, correct?
Some things are future planned use.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great. Councilmember Schroeder?
Since Ramsey County has done these projects before, have you had conversations with them about possibly doing this project?
We have, but really that, to be frank, that goes back to the question that Mayor Rowe asked last time was, are we looking, what are our contingency plans? So we are talking to the city about this particular property, if you will. The only other, our kind of backup plans are still within Ramsey County, but not within the city of Roseville.
So instead of having us be contingency, okay, yeah, okay.
That doesn't, to your question earlier, that doesn't preclude them being potentially a consideration. It's, we first met with, as I said, last summer with the city staff regarding our plans or our desires. And then, if I recall, I think it was in December that the city manager was at our location, and we talked through the process and the options for what at that time seemed pretty dwindling quickly in terms of the cash grant route, and so therefore more likely the GEO bond route. But that was, given the conversations, if you will, had kind of started with the intent of staying within the city of Roseville. We've kind of kept that within Roseville, if you will.
Council members, if I could add just a little more detail and answer a couple of previous questions. I also represent the city of Brooklyn Park, the city of St. Louis Park, and the City of Cologne at the state capitol, and I served for 11 years as a government relations lead for the City of Minneapolis when we did service a lot of these types of projects. And I certainly understand that Minneapolis and St. Paul are not necessarily on the same scale, and it's not necessarily an equal comparison. But operationally and structurally, kind of that process is the same, those contracts, the relationship with the state, the annual reporting. I can tell you that Minneapolis does charge a fee of $120,000 on the upfront for that recognition, because there is that staff time. I'm not sure what other cities charge. It could be across the board, and where they bake that into a contract, I couldn't tell you, but I know that does exist. And I think also, I think Councilmember Etten mentioned, why hasn't anything failed, and how long has this been around? And I think the reason that the use of this partnership between cities and large nonprofits has not failed because of the due diligence that's done on the front end. That we're talking about major nonprofit organizations. We're not talking about fly-by-nights, ones that are very small. The state really only wants to use general obligation bonds for projects like Kids in Need Foundation that are considered statewide assets, and that really do have a statewide, and in our case, even a national impact. So these types of dollars are really reserved for, we mentioned the Children's Museum, the Guthrie is another example, the Ordway. In Brooklyn Park, we have Second Harvest Heartland. I think St. Paul serviced the Dorothy Day Center. So you see cities really stepping up in this space where there's a significant economic development benefit, a significant communal impact, to really recognize that this is a $10 million investment in the community. And if we can support you in that, and also help you in thinking about, recognizing that policy question that you're talking about, if you're setting a precedent, those are policy questions. And they are not ones that you would be the first to be tackling. Are there budget standards you want? Is there a certain history? Is there a certain economic impact that you would want to see in stepping into this role for anyone else who may come to you? And certainly would be here to answer those questions as best I can from that kind of previous support of other councils' experience in this.
Thank you. Councilmember Graff.
Just a couple of details. So during the construction period, we're going to be testing. When was the building built? Do you know? You don't know? Just because there are things that come up like asbestos abatement, lead-based paint, things like that, that can add quite a bit to the cost. So those are a couple little concerns I had. The other one I did want to ask you, and I know you told us last time, but remind us how long your Kids in Need Foundation has been in Roseville and its history.
In Roseville, we have a 10-year lease, so we've been in the city of Roseville 10 years. Prior to that, it was on Kasota Avenue.
Okay.
But overall, the organization's been around for 30 years.
30 years, yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Strong.
I do have an additional question. We've talked so much about this 35 to 40 years. What happens at the end of that term? What changes, if anything, about the ownership of the building and the relationship between the city and the nonprofit? I don't know, that might be a attorney question, yeah. But maybe you have that as well.
Ms. Fiorini?
Council members, once the 125% of the economic life goes away, essentially the ground lease that the city would have would automatically expire. And then at that point, the sort of declaration that's recorded against the property would go away as well. That's an MMB requirement, just to make sure that anyone who tries to buy that property is on notice of the fact that this is state bond finance property. So at that time, the restrictions of the property would all go away, and the nonprofit would be free to do what it wants with the property.
And just to clarify, at that point, the city has no further obligations.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the council? Councilmember Etten.
I think this is my last one. You gave the example of Second Harvest. What is an example from Rosemount or other places? What are some of these suburban examples, please?
Maybe perhaps while that's being researched, I can follow up too, just in terms of the conversations that may or may not have occurred with Ramsey County regarding sort of the Plan B. Have any conversations along those lines happened in terms of specifically this GO bond process in Ramsey County, or just more generally in terms of potential sites in Ramsey County?
Yeah, I think, Mayor, thank you for that question. I think that's a two-part answer. I think from a legislative process and where we are kind of in session and with Kids in Need Foundation's lease, the county is carrying a lot of geo-bonding requests on their list for the state, including no trunk highways and kind of things of that nature. And in terms of when you comes to a pecking order, those are going to come first. And so even if the county did agree to be our fiscal agent, our chances of getting funded would be pretty small. I think because they have a very long dance card of larger kind of county infrastructure things that they're responsible for. And just the way that the legislature looks at a scorecard for a bonding bill is very black and white. The pie is only so big. And if the county's getting X, Y, and Z for a bridge or a road, then it's not getting X, Y, and Z, for anything else. And so I think that's a component of it too, is that they're very overburdened politically, and then also just kind of we're here and we want to stay here and we want to partner with the city and have that relationship with the city.
Right. And the second part being probably not having had those conversations specific to the geo-bonding process with Ramsey County on any other sites.
So the plan is that, so we're, fortunately, and thanks a lot to Melissa and her firm, we have some strong support at the state legislative level. And so if, assuming the bonding conversations continue on after tomorrow's committee session, and whatever the vagaries the roads might go from there. I mean, let's just play it through. Let's say that the state does approve and we do get a geo bond bill that's passed, right? But then the city at the end of the day comes back and says, you know what, that's not something that we can approve. Then the recourse for us would be to ask the legislature to amend the bond request to forward the county to be named as the fiscal agent versus the city.
Next year.
I was just going to say, yes, exactly. That might be past the end of the session, depending on how the bonding process goes.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Gotcha, okay. So then you're in a little bit of limbo with your lease being up at the end of this year.
Well,
Or
yes
you
and
have
no, and
extension
anticipating the fact that, kind of to your comment last time is, we don't put all our eggs in one basket, right? Is that we have an lease extension. In fact, the current nonprofit landlord now, and not the New York City private equity firm, is actually is not wanting us to move out quickly because, it's, when you negotiate with a New York City private equity firm, it's tough negotiation. So our lease payments are very much welcomed today. So we do have an extension. It's an amicable relationship, obviously. So we're not in a situation where come December 1, we're out of space. We have they've offered a 2-year extension if we were to so choose, because with the political process being what it is, we can't be assured that everything is going to go as per schedule or as per expected. So we've had to kind of bake in some contingency plans.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. Any other questions or more information that you want? Oh, the answer to the other question, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Retton, I have a few of the cities here, but I can send you some more. This is kind of a snapshot, but just a recent background. I'm on 2 different pages here, so forgive me. The city of Rosemount financed a family resource center for $450,000. North County Food Bank was $3 million. That was Polk County. Scott County did the Guild for $1.9 million. Second Harvest Heartland, we said, was Brooklyn Park for $18 million. St. Paul American Museum of American Art for $2.5 million. McPhail Center for Music was Minneapolis. So I can send
That's helpful.
a list of that.
Thank you.
And that's just the last couple of years of history.
Sure, right. Any other questions, follow-up? Great. Thank you again for being here this evening and for your help in getting through this process and understanding the information. Did you have a question?
I just had an additional comment. There's a lot of consternation on passersby of Grace Church on Saturday about what was going on with all those grocery carts. So I understand it was a Kids in Need event that was happening, and I heard from some very grateful folks who were involved with that. So I share that. Just Thank you. A lot of people on Facebook wanted to know what was going on. They thought maybe they could just go get a cart and ride around the Grace Church parking lot and whatever was going to get in that cart, they weren't sure, but they were really curious. So thank you for your.
We enjoy a strong relationship with both the high school and Grace Church Roseville. And to be able to use the two properties, the parking lots and the space, it's our annual Thanks a Million event where we're supporting, where it's just we call it an outdoor festival. The teachers actually refer to it as the State Fair for Teachers. And we call it Thanks a Million because it's 1,000 local teachers, each receiving over $1,000 worth of gifts directly for them. And so that's the million. But we had 79 companies participating with us, both local and national, and technically international, because we had a company in Canada come down as well, and 250 local volunteers. This upcoming week is National Teacher Appreciation Week, so this is kind of our part, if you will, of that week. And fortunately, we have 9 of our centers across the country participating, so 6,500 teachers supported. So thank you. We're noticing that fact. The police department is very supportive as well, because an event like that we have to stage in advance. So the police department is also very helpful in making sure that everything goes off, so that we can thank and appreciate 1,000 local teachers.
All right, well, thank you again. I do want to provide an opportunity for public comment as well, so that we always want to make sure we do that. If there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item, this would be the chance to do that. And maybe if you folks can have a seat and relax for a moment, and we'll provide that opportunity and then move to council discussion, although we may have more questions, so don't go too far. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening? All right, seeing no one, then we'll proceed to council consideration. So I did want to check just one thing in terms of entities that can do this. We talked a little bit about the county, and I think it would be a surprise to them if they were asked to do it at this point, because it hasn't been, on the radar for them. But that got me thinking also about school districts. Are school districts eligible to be the local piece of this on these geo bonding funds? Does our attorneys know that? And once again, if anybody asked a school district, it would be news to them, because that hasn't been on the radar yet.
Mr. Mayor, the legislature has a lot of authority to sort of say who gets these grants and what entity it is. I don't think it's common for school districts to get these grants, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't be.
Okay, and that was just a technical question, because like I said, I don't think anybody's talked to any school districts about it, but wanted to understand that. Anything else from the council? Otherwise, I do believe that there is a request. Well, maybe I need to understand that too from a technical aspect. Do we need to do anything to let the legislative process go forward? Unless we don't want to do this, we should probably let the legislative folks know, so that maybe that means that doesn't proceed.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I think Kids in Need would appreciate a response. If we are supportive of it, then they can communicate to their legislators that they have lined up for the bill and the support moving forward. Yeah, certainly if there's not support, I think it's important to share that as well at this point.
Right. Thank you. Council, how would you like to proceed on this? I think there's certainly some policy questions. I think there's certainly also the fact that we've got this particular proposal here this evening or this last couple of weeks in this legislative session, and how we want to deal with that. I think it's not advocating for any approach at this point, because I'm still thinking it through, but certainly one approach is to say we want to have the policy discussion first before we make any decisions in this particular case. And I don't know what that might entail, but that certainly is something that we have done in past situations that aren't exactly this situation, where we wanted to make sure we had some policies in place before we made a decision about a particular occurrence. So that's one. Certainly we can be supportive of or in opposition to our role in this particular case this evening as well. And we probably want to articulate a little bit why in that regard as well. So thoughts from the council as to how we might move forward. And I know this is a tough one, because we've probably all been mulling this through.
Well, I'll go take a
Councilmember
jump.
Graff. Sure.
I'm not as concerned about the policy one as perhaps you are, because I do think each one of these is going to be individual when it comes to us. So I think I don't think I'm setting a policy for like any other group that comes to us. It's gonna follow these three things, and if it has it, I'm going to go with it. I think each one of them will have to be considered separately. Of course, my main concern is, of course, that we don't increase risk for the city. We don't incur a lot of costs, taxes. But on the other hand, you have a long history in Roseville. I'd like to see your organization stay in Roseville. So I am leaning towards supporting it right now. That's where I'm at with the information that I received tonight.
Other council members kind of want to weigh in? And just to be clear, I'm not necessarily saying we need to address the policy thing. I just know that that's sometimes something that councils have thought about in the past. And so I just wanted to put that out there as one of the options, if that's where we're at. I could go too. I could say, you know, I think I'm kind of in the same or a similar place as Councilmember Groff. I think a lot of the questions about the risk to the city have been fairly well addressed. I think, you know, certainly there is the cost to the city in terms of staff time and in terms of some of the, for lack of a better word, nuisance accounting for everything that has to go back to MMB because of their requirements. And, you know, to a certain degree, we can, especially in this case of construction management, we can recover those through the Kids Need folks, and they can potentially use the grant funds to fund some of that. I was interested in, and I made a note about the $120,000 fee from the city of Minneapolis. I think that's an interesting thing, and I would be curious to understand how that works into all this and what it's covering and what it isn't. But that can certainly help, you know, in terms of making sure that we're covering, once again, our talk earlier about fees that we have for other things, are we covering our costs? And so there may be some ways to deal with that, but you know, so that's kind of where I'm tending right now. Some of my initial concerns about the risk to the city and how things unwind if Kids in Need wasn't able to continue the program, and what is the city on the hook for. I think we've got some understanding that maybe that's not so much of a concern, or that we've got ways to deal with that. You know, I think that we still aren't assured, I guess, that the state doesn't have the ability to come back and ultimately get the bond funds back from the city, and that's we have to decide, I guess, the level of risk associated with that, and we'll have to figure that out. But that's just some thoughts. I know Councilmember Bratton, you had your hand up earlier, but maybe you're.
Yeah, I have some things that I really don't, like questions about how much this building, where are we at with it? There are things that concern me about that. I would tend to agree that I think it actually be quite difficult to create a policy around this, because there are so many unique circumstances that I can imagine, from the building to who is actually going to the legislature, to the type of nonprofit it is, and the size of their operations and their impacts, not only on our local community, but nationally in several of these cases, including Kids in Need Foundation. So I'm not as worried about that piece. I do feel better about our potential liabilities now than I did an hour ago. So I'm leaning towards a gentle, sure.
Okay. Noted. Councilmember Schroeder.
I'll be the dissent here. I actually am leaning more towards not supporting it. You know, we talk about strategic planning, long-term planning, what we try to, our budgets and what we're doing. And we weren't involved with this from the beginning, and so we didn't have this put into our plan, or, what we're doing, staff time, the legal part and all of this. And so I didn't like the timing of this. If we would have had more, a longer on-ramp, maybe I'd be more comfortable with this. So I guess having someone else's timeline be the one to make it our issue, that's a hard one for me too. So I guess I think the organization does incredible work, and that has nothing to do with it. It's more just this whole process, and I think there's still some unknowns here that I'm not comfortable with. So I'm tending to go to not supporting it.
Great. Councilmember Strawn, thoughts?
Well, I've also been on a roller coaster. I was a yes, and then a definite no, and I'm definitely somewhere the pendulum swinging back. I think something that's, I agree with the policy. While it's great to think that we could have a policy, because I love policies, whereas Robin likes numbers, I love policies. But I think they would be each so unique, each situation, that I don't know. But I do know right now we're in a time crunch. And so this is the time where it needs to be. So if we put a policy consideration in there, I think we would essentially close the door for this project for this year. So I think that would be making a decision, even if we weren't making a decision. As a licensed teacher for another 45 days or so, because I didn't renew my license, the future of workforce development is extremely important. So I do think that does pique an interest and the possibility, having sat through a number of the Roseville Business Council events where the workforce folks come from the high schools, both in Roseville and in the Montague School District, to talk about the importance of that aspect of things. And I think, other cities have the Urban League and other places like that where they have those kind of baked into their system. We don't really have that here, and so that is a unique opportunity to allow them to be able to expand that and provide something that is more than what our school district has been expected or has the capacity to bring on at that level. So I think the considerations, yes, I still have a lot of concern about liability and being on the hook, but at the same time, there's kind of got to be that assumption of positive intent where we look at what the aspirations are. And yes, the timing is never going to be up to what we want, for sure. That just comes part and parcel with life. But I think that I'd be more inclined to support this at this point, knowing that there are pieces to it that would bring really unique aspects of benefit to our city that without them, we would have a kind of a hole. We didn't know that was needed to be filled, but now that that possibility exists, there's that kind of that musings like, okay, there's something that really we could certainly gain. And I think knowing that if an organization has been around, has multiple sites across the country, and has met so much demand where they are, I feel like knowing that at the end of the 40 years, if we got that far and the building is still standing, our obligations significantly, they cease to exist. And you look at Wilder and other organizations like that who've been, at 40 years, we're just getting going. So I think we have to hope for positive intent and that the goal is they will continue to do good things for many, many years.
Well, we've kind of each had a chance to say something. I think the next step would be if somebody wanted to make a motion in regard to this request.
What exactly are we saying?
I don't know that there is a specific, it would be essentially a motion to be supportive of the general obligation bonding request of Kids in Need Foundation.
Well, I would make that motion.
And I'll second.
All right. We've got the motion from Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn, to support the request for general obligation bonding for this project from the state of Minnesota for Kids in Need Foundation. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Groff, I don't know if there's anything you wish to add, but.
I don't think there really is. I think as far as Councilmember Strawn's talking about our strategic planning and things like that, I think this fits very much into our strategic planning. This fills a gap in what we've talked about of being inclusive in Roseville and including more people and opportunities. So I see this as completing some of our goals. There is some risk to it, and that's what we've all talked about, but I think tonight I've had enough of those discussed, and I feel comfortable with it.
Right. And as the seconder, Councilmember Strawn?
I don't have anything else to say.
Nothing else? Okay. Other discussion on the motion?
No, thank you.
All right. With that, we've got the motion before us, once again, in support of the Kids Need Foundation general obligation bonding request from the state of Minnesota, with Roseville serving as essentially, I guess, the fiscal agent as outlined in the legislation. With that, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, that passes 4-1 with Councilmember Schroeder in opposition. That, I think, concludes this item for now until we see what the legislature does, and obviously there will be a whole host of legal documents associated with it, assuming that the bonding is passed. The only thing I wanted to note, and this isn't necessarily changing my point of view on this, but the comment was made about Ramsey County having a lot of bonding requests, and where if the request for this project went through Ramsey County, they'd be sort of competing with everything else at Ramsey County. I do remember we have a bonding request before the state legislature too, so hopefully we're not ruining our chances to get our $750,000.
Very difficult to get an
or-
answer on where that stands,
All right.
to be honest. So
Yep.
I've been trying.
Well, hopefully it all can happen. All right, with that, thank you again to everybody from Kids in Need for all the work you do in the community and more broadly, as has been noted nationwide, and for choosing Roseville initially as a place to be when you had the chance to make a move at that point 10 years ago, and for all of your help in this process to get to this point this evening. So we wish you luck in the bonding, and look forward to probably having to sign a lot of documents going forward here. All right. you bet. All right, council, we're at 8 o'clock. Do we want to take our traditional 8 o'clock break? Or we want to plow in?
Yeah, we got a long way to go.
Break time? All right, we'll take about a 5-minute break.
Presumptive bathroom break.
Yeah.
Calling back to order the city council meeting here. We are back from our short break and are ready to continue with our agenda. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more items on our business items this evening, 4 of which I believe are all in the same category, which is considering presumptive penalties for alcohol compliance check failures. And we've got our deputy police chief back with us for this item. The chief decided to delegate this one, I see. And with that, welcome back, Chief Adams. And we'll begin with the first item under consideration here, which is to consider the presumptive penalty for the violation for Red Lobster. And I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Adams.
Mayor, members of the council, apologize, I'm up here again. I feel like we're getting comfortable with each other in this space, but as you know, each year the Roseville Police Department conducts 2 alcohol compliance checks for alcohol licensees. This year, the first round of checks were completed on March 23rd, and we had a total of 5 failures. For 2024, all businesses with city liquor licenses were provided a letter advising them the city would be conducting alcohol compliance checks. The letter also reminded them on the requirement that all employees must undergo annual approved server training. Due to the total number of failures, I'll provide a brief summary of each incident followed by staff recommendations. And I do believe we have some representatives from a few of the restaurants here today. So Mayor, as you mentioned, Red Lobster is the first we'll go over, and on March 23rd, a compliance checker went to Red Lobster to conduct a compliance check. While there, the checker ordered a beer. The employee then served our checker the beer without asking for identification. The server was issued an administrative citation. However, our police department has not yet received payment. As with past practice, the seller violation is being transferred to the city attorney's office for further review. Management later provided the necessary training documentation to PD staff, and I will take a moment to say that the information you received in your packet is going to differ a little bit from what I'm going to present today because I have received training since then, so if you guys read it beforehand. But I did receive training documentation from Red Lobster. This is Red Lobster's 3rd violation in 36 months. It's staff's recommendation for council to issue and administer the presumptive penalty pursuant to city code for on-sale license holders for a 3rd violation, which is a mandatory minimum penalty of $2,000 and a 15-day liquor license suspension.
All right, thank you, Chief. And just a question on the 3rd violation in 36 months. Can you address what the timing was of the previous violations in that period?
So they had 2 previous failures, which were back-to-back, but that was July and then December of 2022.
Okay, so just sort of at the beginning of the 3-year look back that we're at right now. Okay, thank you. Questions for staff? Councilmember Strawn.
Could you also remind us what happens if there is a 4th violation?
Yes, for the 4th violation per city code, the staff's recommendation, I want to make sure I get the verbiage correct, but is the revocation of liquor license.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Councilmember Etten?
Go ahead with that, please.
Councilmember Schroeder?
And what period of time would that be for, that would that start over again? So you say after 4, you have revoking the license, but then what period of time would have to go by for it to have the old ones fall off, I guess?
Thank you, Councilmember Schroeder. And in my time, in 20 years, we have not had this happen. I believe that could potentially be up to council, but that's probably a more policy question that's not specifically laid out.
Okay.
But it is a 3-year look back.
Yeah.
So it's a rolling 3 years,
Right.
3 years, 36
So-
months.
Okay.
If we did another compliance check later this year and they happen to fail again, and
that'd be the
the
4th.
look back,
Me to 2022.
depending on exactly what the date is, it may
So it'd be
include.
July
so it could be the
25
4th, yes.
Before they'd be,
I
and that would roll
believe
off.
so. I hesitate to do that in my head because I always make mistakes, but potentially that could be a 4th at that point within the 36 months. Councilmember Etten?
You said that you received training information. Can you talk about, it almost sounded like all the training had not been done before this violation, that more people were trained after? Was I misunderstanding that?
I apologize if I didn't explain it well enough. I did receive training documentation in a timely manner from Red Lobster via email.
That all employees had been trained before that incident?
Right. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
All the employees that I'm aware of.
I understand that, yeah. Fair enough. Thank
Are
you.
there other questions? Otherwise, is there, Councilman?
Just a quick one. How many businesses do you check each, and when you go out each 6 months or whatever it is? Do you check every liquor license in
That is
Roseville?
correct, yep, every liquor license holder in the city of Roseville, on and off sale.
How many is that? What's the number, do you know?
I apologize,
You know,
Councilman.
It's probably in the 30s.
30s to 40, yeah.
Just wondering proportionally, 5 is a lot out of 30. 5 is not so much out of 150.
Right, yeah, it's not 150, but I believe last time I looked at it, which is years ago, it was probably in the 30s or
Okay.
40 range, yeah.
So it's about
So there's about 9 or 10 off sale, and then we've got a lot of on sale to the restaurants. Right, is there a representative of Red Lobster this evening? Feel free to come on up and introduce yourself, and make whatever comments you wish to make about this violation.
Okay. My name is Hiram. I'm the general manager of the Roseville Red Lobster. So that day I was the manager on duty that was working. We had gotten a very large to-go order. We do some for the University of Minnesota, so it was over like $1,000 order, 110 pastas. We had started about 10 a.m. before we even opened, just trying to get all of that ready for the day. My bartender came in just a little later. He was just getting everything set up before he was gonna help me. We had opened, but I was still just working on that to-go order. And we do have other practices in place from the previous ones. So there's like a daily sign-in sheet for all of our servers and bartenders, anyone who sells alcohol. So all of my servers had signed it that day. I took a picture of that right after this had happened, just to show they were all ready. But unfortunately, I did not get to talk to my bartender in a position that day about it. So as I was still working on that order, he was up front and he was the one that sold it. So right after this, I already went ahead and put a few things in place before some other things that we're still working on as well. So, you know, for starters, I had all of my employees, some of their trainings, I just had everybody's reset. Some of them it felt like a little outdated. I think one of the oldest one was like since 2022. So I went ahead, I emailed my training, had everybody's training reset, and we're in the process of redoing that for everybody so that they know what they're supposed to be doing. We're still continuing that daily sign-in check for everybody as well. Little notes that everybody can put in their book as well, so that once they open it, they see right there in front of them every time they're, you know, asking a guest for an ID, just to make sure that they're doing that. And then we also are part of the BARS program, which is just like a program where someone of age is coming in just to make sure that we are checking for IDs. So they'll come up to the bar top or take a seat at a table. I'm gonna just ask, you know, for an alcoholic beverage, same thing. So you get a red card if you don't ask for an ID, or a green card if you do. And I have documentation, there's only been one before my time, of a red card violation, and this started last February. So once a month, and I did just increase it to twice a month after this incident as well. But there's only been one violation of that since then. A few of the other things that we are putting into place is universal carding. So we're just gonna card everybody just to make sure that they are old enough of age regardless. Normally we do anyone that's under the age of 30 will ask for identification, just to make sure. We have signage posted up now. There was already some before, but just put up some extra ones by all of the POS stations whenever you're ringing something in. You know, hey, did you make sure you ID'd this, you know, guest before you ring this in or serve this, is another thing that we're doing. Zero tolerance, so all servers know that if they don't ID somebody, they will be terminated. Our previous employee that did fail this sting, he was terminated a couple days later, and everybody knows that the same will follow for them if they do not. And the BARS program with that, if anyone gets a red card, they'll be given a final written warning, and if they were the same employee to fail it twice, then they would be terminated as well with that. And then, like I said, just a daily reminder, so what's in their book whenever they're opening it, and then a sign-in sheet as well too. Secondary carding, so if anyone's never sure of what to do, they're always got to get a manager's verification, so just making sure. So, you know, if someone's not too sure if they should give this guest a drink, just coming to the manager and asking, you know, hey, is it okay? You know, will you take a second look at this ID? I just want to make sure that this is okay. And then, like I said, signing, signs all over, and retraining what we have already taught them before.
Right. And are you requesting any change to the penalty that is being proposed? In reflection of what you're talking about, I just want to understand if you're trying to make a case for mitigation. No, some entities do request that, and so I just wanted to make sure I understood what your besides telling us what you're doing, was there anything else you were asking of us this
I
evening?
suppose I've only been the GM there for about 2 months, and my director there has also just been, we just had like a whole region change, so she's only been my director for about 2 months now as well. So we're both very new to this restaurant. I mean, if that was something to consider, I would request that, but again, I don't know how the whole process works for that, so.
No, that's fair enough, but like I said, I just wanted to clarify, because you have the opportunity to plead your case for mitigation or anything like that, so if you were, I wanted to be clear that we understood that, so. All right, well, thank you for being here this evening. Are there any questions for the manager? All right, thank you again. All right. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this particular violation? All right, seeing no one come forward. We have the requested action, which once again is the mandatory $2,000 fine and 15-day suspension of the liquor license. Council?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Ratten, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to authorize the mandatory penalty as outlined. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Ratten.
I appreciate you coming in and outlining about 12 different steps that you're going to pursue, and understanding that you're new helps me. Because I had, as the deputy chief said, I've never seen a third violation before. It makes me pretty excited. So you brought me down a few notches going through that series of processes you're following, and I appreciate that. And I'm not ready to change this presumptive penalty, which is pretty severe. But at the same time, I do feel a little better understanding that they're taking some significant management changes. So.
All right. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing, Councilmember Strawn.
I'd just add, I appreciate the long list of things you're working toward. It does feel severe, but I think it's there because we don't want to be here, and we want to make sure we're not here, and we don't want to know what it feels like to get to Fourth. We just want to make sure that Red Lobster especially is a really family-oriented place. We want to make sure that it upholds that aspect of things as well, that we're, these alcohol compliance checks are in place because we really believe that they need to be done. So thank you for your efforts to continue, and I hope we don't see you here again.
All right. If there's no further discussion, we've got the motion before us to authorize the presumptive penalty in this case. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That penalty is authorized. Deputy Chief.
Unit 7 before you is for Portillo's Restaurant. On March 23rd, 2024, a compliance checker went to Portillo's to conduct a compliance check. While there, the checker ordered a beer. The employee then reviewed our checker's identification but proceeded to provide the alcohol to our checker. The server was issued an administrative citation, which has since been paid. Management later provided the necessary training documentation to PD staff. It's staff's recommendation for the council to issue and administer the presumptive penalty pursuant to city code for on-sale license holders for a second violation in 36 months, which is a mandatory minimum penalty of $2,000 and a 5-day liquor license suspension. And I will note their last violation was on our previous check in November.
All right. Thank you. Is there a representative of Portillo's here with us this evening? Does not appear to be the case. Questions from the council for staff? Councilmember Grimes?
I have a question that you may or may not be able to answer, but I was wondering, the person who was a server said they were originally from Taiwan. Was there any possibility of a language barrier that you know of in this case?
Not that I'm aware of. I do feel like there would be a note in the report of an interpreter had one been needed. However, I can't affirmatively say that, Councilman.
Thanks.
All right. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this particular violation and requested presumptive penalty? Seeing no one. Council action on this violation?
I'd move to,
I think it was moved by Councilmember Groff.
then I'll second.
All right. Seconded by Councilmember Schroeder.
I'll speak up next time.
Oh, there you go. Well, I'm in the way.
I'm on your good
I'm in the way. With that, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Schroeder.
The only thing, there's only 4 months between the two violations, and so that was a little disturbing, that you would hope that the training would have still been there, but.
Right, and Councilmember Hatton?
I really appreciate Councilmember Groff bringing up a language thing. I think that's always something we should be aware of. At the same time, also, the training should address, you know, which way is it, you know, that's part of the training, right? And what does it look like, what are the orientation, and what is the allowed limit, it's, or age, so. I think it's a really important question to be thinking about as we look at some of the people who are working and doing a great job in a lot of our city restaurants, but also, if you're doing the training, you should know that answer.
Great. Any other discussion? Councilmember Groff?
Just a little more on that, because I did notice in some of the others, and I'm just making assumptions here, but I wonder if, you know, if that message is somehow not getting through, because it is pretty obvious when the card is one way, you should be able to just look at it. So it might not be answered tonight, but I want us to be thinking about that and maybe get an answer for that in the future.
Well, I think there are probably legitimate challenges to be a server or a bartender with a language barrier in the first place, because you're not going to understand necessarily what people's orders are. So I think that, but I can also see that even if there isn't a language barrier, there could potentially be a sort of a cultural thing where people, their culture is to be nice to people, so they kind of maybe think it's appropriate to look the other way and don't understand how the process works, things like that. So that could be a thing as well, and so I think it is good to be thoughtful about that and how we can, you know, how the programs that are out there to educate people can be responsive to that. Ultimately, we still have the letter of our law to enforce, and we have to do that, which is the challenge here. But I think it's good to be mindful, even as to the point of how we write the letter of our law and if we need to make any changes there. So, good points. With that, we have the motion before us on the Portillo's violation. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. The next one is in relation to Shake Shack. Once again, Deputy Chief.
So once again, on March 23rd, a compliance checker went to Shake Shack to conduct a compliance check. While there, the checker ordered a beer. The employee then reviewed our checker's identification but proceeded to serve the alcohol to our checker. The server was issued an administrative citation, which has since been paid. Management later provided the necessary training and documentation to PD staff. It's staff's recommendation for council to issue and administer the presumptive penalty pursuant to city code for on-sale license holders for a second violation in 36 months, which is a mandatory minimum penalty of $2,000 and a 5-day liquor license suspension. And I'll note that this is also back-to-back failures for Shake Shack as well.
Thank you. Questions for staff from council members? Great. Is there a representative of Shake Shack with us this evening? Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this particular presumptive penalty request? Seeing no one, is there a motion from the council in regard to the Shake Shack violation?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Ratten. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That presumptive penalty is approved. Then brings us to La Tapatia and Deputy Chief.
Again, on March 23rd, a compliance checker went to La Tapatia to conduct a compliance check. While there, the compliance checker ordered a beer. The bartender checked the ID but proceeded to serve alcohol to the checker. The server was issued an administrative citation. However, our police department has not yet received payment. This seller violation is being transferred to the city attorney's office. I spoke of La Tapatia this morning by telephone, as I had not seen their training records yet. However, the owner hand-delivered them to me earlier today, so we do now have them. The presumptive penalty pursuant to city code for on-sale license holders for a first violation is a mandatory minimum penalty of $2,000 and a 1-day liquor license suspension. That is what's being brought forward.
All right, thank you again. Questions from the council on this one? All right. And is there a representative of La Tapatia with us this evening? Does not appear to be the case. Anyone from the public wish to speak to this particular requested presumptive penalty? Seeing no one, is there a motion from the council?
So, second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff to authorize the issuance of the presumptive penalty in the case of La Tapatia for their first violation within 36 months. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That presumptive penalty is authorized. And then finally, I believe the fifth violation this evening under consideration is for Bonchon, and I'll turn it back over to the deputy chief.
When the third, a compliance checker went to Bonchon to conduct a compliance check. While there, the compliance checker ordered a beer. The employee checked the ID but proceeded to serve the alcohol to the checker. The server was issued an administrative citation, which has since been paid. I reconnected with Bonchon management earlier this afternoon and learned that their training program was not within city guidelines. Specifically, the verbal training from the manager to employees was not documented or signed off on. With that said, we did have a very good conversation, and the manager is here today and can speak to the plan moving forward of taking training to the next step and actually crossing some of the language barrier that we had spoke about in some of the other restaurants to do some of the training on their own as is allowed per our city licensing. The presumptive penalty pursuant to city code for on-sale license holders for a first violation is a mandatory minimum penalty of $2,000 and a one-day liquor license suspension. But as mentioned, the police department was lacking the training records appropriately, still are.
Right. Questions for staff on this particular case? Councilmember Strong.
Just wondering if it would be appropriate to assess the same fine if they also aren't in compliance with the training records as expected.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Strawn. I believe the $2,000 was set. I think, I don't want to speak to exact policy on this, but I do believe that maybe the suspension is adjustable, but maybe the fine was within a parameter. But I don't know if there's any recollection of that from the council.
I can probably shed a little bit of light on that, having been involved in drafting some of that language originally in the code. As I understood it, the $2,000 fine is actually in state statute as a limit. I think that conceivably, the training violation is a separate violation, and so conceivably could be assessed a fine up to $2,000 for that specific instance, as opposed to the compliance check violation, which is, as I said, a secondary thing or a separate matter. So unless our attorney wants to advise otherwise.
She's ready.
Yeah.
Mayor, council members, actually, it would be an other under your fee schedule. So for this particular violation, it would only be a fine of $100, not $2,000. So you wouldn't be able to assess the $2,000 for this particular other violation because of its classification. So it's not technically an exact violation of the same thing. Does that make sense?
Right.
So it would be an other violation, or what you could do is you could make this an aggravating factor in deviating from the suspension time for under this particular violation, but it kind of should be an either-or proposition. So either this is an other violation or this is an aggravating factor or nothing. You guys can proceed as you were planning to before.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Further questions from the council? Councilmember Strong?
I do have another question. My understanding was that the owner of Bonchon also owned another property in that same strip mall. Do we know if we've had, I guess only if they failed the check, would we know if they didn't have training records at that facility?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Strawn, and I do not recall or have an answer for that at the moment. The way that our licensing works currently is at the inception of an alcohol license annually, or when they get new employees, they have to go through an alcohol training. That is all housed in-house, not here within the city, so we only ask for it in light of a failure, so I would not be able to know that at the moment.
And certainly our licenses are per licensee, and penalties would be per licensee, so we couldn't necessarily, I don't believe, sort of accumulate violations under single ownership simply because it was the same ownership of two different licensees per se.
Yeah,
But
it
it's
was-
something that could be noted probably. but not
Yeah, I
much
guess
more
it's
than that.
probably just general information, like, hey, this will apply no matter where you do business if you have a liquor license, which I know we've approved for that other facility not too long ago. So this standard applies across all of our restaurants who have a liquor license. So just, I guess, maybe helping them avoid future issues as well, rather than seeing them here next time for two different organizations, if we can avoid it.
Well, and I think certainly if we know of license holders that are the same ownership for multiple licenses, and one or more of those sites seems to have a history of violations, that is probably something that can be taken into account upon consideration of a application for renewal of a license. That is certainly one of the areas that the council can take into account in those regards. So, but certainly you can't penalize one license holder for another license holder's activities, other than probably considering the same owner in multiple sites as to their renewals. With that, do we have a representative of Banchan who wishes to speak to the council this evening? And certainly it's your option, you don't have to, but if you've been here patiently all evening, you might as well avail yourself of that. Yes. We tried to be as interesting as we could. But,
oh, you guys are good.
If you could introduce yourself and feel free to make your
Hi, my
comment.
name is Kevin. Greetings, Mayor, council members. My name is Kevin. I'm pretty much in place of acting as the GM of the Banchan Roseville location. There's no excuse for it, honestly. That is my fault on our end. I have briefed my new wait staff on, you must not serve alcohol to people under the age of 21. You have to check for IDs. I don't care if they look old, if they have a beard. Honestly, to be really honest with you, even when the customers, when they have a full-on beard, when they ask about it, oh, why do you have to check? I blame it on City Hall.
We are happy to fill that role.
For me, it's mainly about, it's more like follow the rules. It doesn't matter if they look older or younger. Just check the ID, just like a gas station for a pack of cigarettes or beer, Unfortunately, these two new servers that I have are great. They're amazing, but they're new. The language barrier that one of the council members have brought up is still not an excuse at the end of the day. There's a card, there's an ID right there. You should know what year you can sell and you cannot sell. That I will be more on top of things. The day of, I can explain it, but it's still not an excuse, Busy day. I finally just took one step away, 1 second to go to the bathroom and take a step outside. And I get a call from my guy. Hey, police are here. I said, cool, give him a discount. That was not the case.
Not necessarily cool.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really on my end. I apologize about that. I have signed up, as I talked with this gentleman right here. He gave me 2 websites to go check out training courses and everything. As I was sitting there, I looked at both sites. I have decided which one to apply for the training. That language barrier is completely fine because I will do the course tonight or tomorrow, finish it up, and train my staff, and also have the sign-in sheets as. I was taking notes when he was doing all this, Okay. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys welcoming us into your community. Yes, the store right next door, Korean barbecue. If you guys haven't had it, come through. But I will make sure to double check with the manager on that site. If they have a sign in, and if they don't, I will get it done and signed. Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
get it handled, of course. Because, you shouldn't be serving to kids under 21, especially if you're doing business at the end of the day.
Right.
We're here to make money.
Absolutely, and you can't if you're suspended, or if you're paying fines, right?
Yes.
Exactly, or as much, certainly. Well, we appreciate you being here this evening and taking good notes, and certainly one of the things that probably makes sense too is to develop those peer-to-peer relationships
Yes.
among restaurant managers and owners in the community, because I think what was outlined by Red Lobster earlier, including the bars program, I mean, that's pretty substantial to be able to have sort of your own compliance checks on a bi-monthly basis. Hopefully get you in a position where everybody's on the
the
ball
same
about
page,
it, so appreciate that.
No, of course, I'm shaking right now, I'm sorry.
All right, well,
I'm sorry, sir.
we are too, so. Well, thank you again for being here and for that commitment, and we appreciate that.
I appreciate you guys, thank you.
All right, all right, now you can relax.
I'm so shaking.
All right. With that, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this particular request for the compliance failure presumptive penalty? Seeing no one, then is there a motion from the council?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Graff, seconded by Councilmember Etten to issue the presumptive penalty, which once again is the one-day suspension of the $2,000 fine. Discussion on the motion?
No, I just want to thank you for coming in and explaining what you're doing. That's helpful because when we're working on these things up here, we have just the information that's there and we don't know exactly what you're doing to remedy these things. So it makes us feel a little better, but we don't want to see you back here. We want to only see you when we go into your restaurant for something to eat.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
I'll be there.
All right. Very good. We've got the motion before us then. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that presumptive penalty is authorized. All right, and thank you, Deputy Chief, and all of the folks, the compliance checker, and all the officers involved for the hard work that's involved in this as well, and all the tracking down of records and things like that. So, and as always, if there are suggestions we learn through our end of the process that we need to update our process and how we do things or what's in our code, keep us aware of those as well. All right, thank you again. That brings us then to some really fun things for the people in the audience, which is city council minutes from prior meetings. And we have the minutes specifically from our April 8th, April 15th, and April 22nd council meetings. Are there any additional changes or corrections noted by council members or a motion related to approval of any of those minutes?
We split them, Mayor.
Yeah, I think we have to
We
split
have
them up.
we've got some abstentions, right? Okay, got it. We might as well take them as individual motions probably then, huh?
We'll move approval of April 8th.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Graff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to approve the minutes from April 8th as presented. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. That passes 4-0 with Councilmember Strawn in opposition. In abstention.
Wow.
Sorry.
Seems less aggressive.
Verbal habits. All right, that brings us then to the minutes of April 15th. Is there a motion related to those?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder, is how I heard it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
And a discussion on that motion. Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
All right, we
Not
have
sure
that
how to
passed
answer these.
4-0 with Councilmember Etten in abstention on that motion. Then we finally have the minutes of our April 22nd council meeting. Is there a motion related to those minutes?
so moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 5-0, it passes. All right, that brings us then to our consent agenda, the remaining items, with the exception of item 10C. Mr. Trudgeon, would you give us an introduction for those items?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10A approves payments in the amount of $446,372.71. Item 10B approves several expenditures that include a replacement pickup truck for the Parks and Recreation Department, along with associated equipment to outfit it for snow plowing and hauling trailers, the completion of a pavement condition survey, crack sealing of 15 to 20 miles of city streets, and the rental of a spray patch machine for the summer. Item 10C, as you said, was already acted upon. Item 10D approves entering into professional services agreement with American Engineering Testing for construction projects material testing for the 2024 projects. Item 10E approves entering into revised agreement for a pathway agreement being constructed as part of the apartment development at 1415 County Road B. The revised agreement corrects an error in the legal description contained in the pathway agreement approved on July 10th, 2023. Item 10F approves entering into a grant agreement with the state of Minnesota for the Community Crime Intervention and Prevention Grant to fund the Housing Navigator position within the police department. The city has been awarded $301,400 to fund the Housing Navigator position, the funding of an intern, and a vehicle to assist the homeless outreach efforts through the end of 2025. That's great news. That's something we had hoped for as part of the budgeting process, and we finally got the paperwork done, so that was great.
Good.
And then finally, item 10G approves the acceptance of the Minnesota Office of Justice Programs 2024 Firearms Storage Grant. This grant allows us to make the necessary improvements in the police department facility to ensure the safe storage of firearms collected under the recently changed law regarding extreme risk protection orders. And that is the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion from the council on the consent
So
agenda?
moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on the motion?
No.
All right, and double check, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to any of those items? All right,
chance.
with that, we've got the motion before us, no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved or accepted. That brings us to future agenda review, communications reports, announcements, and future agenda items from council members. With that, we'll start with the future agenda review. Mr. Trudgeon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real briefly, our next meeting is next Monday. We'll start off the evening with an EDA meeting. We expect, all told, it should probably take no more than a half hour. Discuss updating the housing study, something that's been in the EDA budget, and then hopefully 2 quick business items to approve a contract with CEE and approve TIF note modifications for the Oasis and Harbor Apartments. At the actual work session, we'll spend as much time as needed to talk about the HRIC purpose, scope, and role. Staff met with the subcommittee this afternoon, so I think we have it worked out as far as what's going to be presented, and then have a fuller discussion. We also want to discuss a possible partnership with the Roseville School District regarding joint use of Parkview Center school grounds for recreational activities. Did send an email out earlier today just to provide some additional background. Mr. Johnson in the Parks and Rec Department will provide background and some other conversations around what we could possibly do to look at the replacement of Veterans Park for the new maintenance facility. On the 20th, we will have a quick update from Visit Roseville from Ms. Wern. We'll have, I'm sorry, the all-department equity update has been changed to June 3rd, so I didn't change that. I apologize. We'll talk about the fire department staffing review and also an easement vacation for 571 Roselawn. We anticipate having perhaps a closed session for my city manager performance review at that meeting. And then on June 3rd, we have some right-of-way vacations, awarding the contract of recycling carts, and assuming we do the performance review, look to accept the city manager goals. The last thing I would mention is you're well aware of the fence on McCarran's. We did officially receive an appeal today to staff's determination. So we're going to have to fit it in somewhere along that time frame. We have to hold it within 30 days. I'm tentatively looking at May 20th to do that. So just a heads up on that. We'll provide more information as we get more. That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Other questions on the future agendas? Councilmember Strawn.
I would assume that it would be a timely matter if we found out something about the government, about the GO bonds.
Yes, I think the session ends May 20th, if I recall correctly, so we're going to know pretty quick whether that's in, and I'll certainly communicate that out. I think, well, we can talk about the next steps after that, but I think there will be a lot more conversation in this level as we work on some of the agreements.
All right. Other questions on the future agendas or councilmember reports, announcements, requests for future agenda items?
I mean, a liaison report from NYFS. We're having the luncheon on Wednesday, May 8th at the Vadnais Heights Commons. I guess if someone sends an RSVP really quickly, we can get them in.
All right.
Don't just show up.
So if I was going to say, if people start showing up or if they RSVP late,
Blame me, I guess.
it's Councilmember Grubb's fault.
Angie will be saying, what did you do?
But other than rules being rules, I'm sure that if folks can't attend, they could find other ways to support
can.
the very, very valid organization in the community here. Other liaison reports, announcements? I think the only thing I'll add just along those lines is the Rice and Larpenteur Alliance on Saturday from noon to 2 is having their Community in Bloom, which is in Roseville each spring at the McCarran's Lake County Park down in that part of Roseville. So encourage folks to attend. There will be staff, I think Noel often is there boothing for sustainability things. There are representatives from various county agencies and others that will be there, and fun activities for families, people of all ages. I do want to specifically note, for those who are volunteer-oriented, that they are still looking for some volunteers to fill some 2-hour shifts, either the first portion or the second portion to help with some setup or cleanup, as well as staffing the event itself. And so I encourage you to, if you're interested, to go to the Roseville Entrepreneur Alliance website and sign up for that. But I know they were still looking for volunteers, and so it's a worthwhile event. It's also fun, so it looks like it's going to be a decent day. So I'd encourage folks, if you can, volunteer for that to help them out in that way. Anything else from council members? Councilmember Strong?
I'd just like to mention, I've started having people reach out with questions regarding the 4th of July and our Roseville Festival. So that, just clarification that those fireworks do happen the Saturday prior to the 4th of July, not on Independence Day. It's not been canceled, it's just been changed in an attempt to keep, maybe give it a little bit more of a hometown feel and opportunity to keep it safe and place where people want to be involved. So just make sure if you read through those documents, you read through the whole parts, but it's not meant to take something away. It's meant to really give back a little bit more of the community element of it.
Well, as folks may recall, there was definitely a challenge with staffing the event on the 4th of July because of the fact that not only is it a time that people in the community want to take time off and celebrate, but also people that work for the city as well. And so there's some challenges with, especially from the safety side, being able to provide for an event that is safe for especially people coming into the community from outside of Roseville for this large 4th of July celebration event. The thought is putting it at a time when we can staff it better, and also maybe the crowd won't be quite as substantial because it's not on the 4th of July. We're giving it a try, and we'll see how it goes, and if we need to make an adjustment in future years, we can do that, but that's the reasoning behind it, and hopefully folks in the community can find it to be as enjoyable of a celebration.
Either
and
Minneapolis or
fun.
St. Paul has reinstituted their fireworks for this coming year, so there will be somewhere on the 4th of July if you're so inclined.
Well, I was going to note that a lot of communities actually have their community festival nowhere near the 4th of July, so it
correct.
just kind of happens that Roseville's is, and that's why we probably had done it in the past. But with that, I think we've covered that.
One is very quick
Yep.
enough, and I promise. Arts Roseville is having one of their arts talks on Saturday between 11 and noon. It's co-sponsored with the library, and they use legacy funds for this. It'll be a printmaker named Faye Passow. She's very established in the Twin Cities, and if you want to know more about printmaking, the process, and she'll have some of her work displayed there, 11 until noon on Saturday at the library.
At the library, and then you can head right to the community in Bloom over
There
in
you go, yeah,
McCann's
you
Lake
can
Park.
double up.
All right.
It'll be a perfect day.
Wonderful.
Hopefully
All
good
right.
weather.
With that, if there's no further business before the council, the only other item on our agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Adden to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned at 8:55 PM. Thank you, everyone.